I'll call the meeting of the Bellevue City Council Extended Study Session back into order. We have been in executive session on a quasi-judicial matter. On approval of the agenda, I would like to add an item at council business and new initiatives dealing with hate crimes and anti-Semitism. That'll be a report from our police department on a recent occurrence here in Bellevue.
Move that we approve the amended agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the amended agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. We are at communication written and oral. We have begun using our new electronic sign-up system for tonight. I understand what we will do as we move forward is take those who use the electronic system. If we have time left over for those who did not, we will take them. That's been the way we have operated. Ms. Clark, how many people do we have signed up?
We have one person signed up on the electronic sign-in and one on the paper.
Okay, so we are definitely going to have time. 3 minutes to speak to the council on any topic. When the green light goes on, you're on the clock. The yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute, and the red light means you are done. I'll give you a couple of seconds to go over. If you would call the first person to speak, please.
Our first speaker signed up tonight is Dennis Curran.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members. My name is Dennis Curran. I'm the Vice President of Administrative Services from Bellevue College, and I'm here tonight as a representative of the college. You'll be hearing later tonight that a portion of the Kaline bus line is planned to run through Bellevue College. And I'm just here to say that the college supports this plan to provide access for our students and our employees. We think the Kaline project is important to the future of education in the state, and we really appreciate the partnership between the city, King County Metro, and the college on this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe that's fine. And there's one other person who has already said, and I'm going to guess that's Mr. Zimmerman.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I don't really use computer, never, because it's not legal. I mean, legal, not for me. Okay, thank you very much. Sieg Heil, my lovely commie, Nazi, Democrat, pig from Animal Farm, a fascist, Gestapo, and killer. My name is Alex Zimmerman. I want to speak about something what is I see for last 30 years. And I speak right now to this 2 million freaking idiot who live in this king country. Why a freaking idiot always elect same people again and again and again, and many staying in chamber for 25 years. King country, for example, or U.S. Senate. It's a joke. When I come to America more than 30 years ago, I think I have a country what is have constitution, freedom of speech, and common sense. We don't. And I explained to you why. I have 11 trespass from Seattle for 1,200 a day. For a year, I cannot go to council chamber. Consul Dombovsky interrupt me for last 4 years in every his meeting. He trespass me from every his meeting. Use sheriff. Sheriff a pure freaking Gestapo, and I publicly talk about this many times in King Country. What is happening now, right now, here is a unique situation. We're talking about something like racism, anti-Semitism, something, discrimination of women, discrimination. I'm sick and tired from this bullshit. Pardon
All right.
for my French. No, sorry. I'm so sorry. BS, yeah, I'm so sorry. So situation right now, very simple right now. We need to stop on this. When we will elect normal people, not freaking idiot, who understand what is mean common sense. I'm very surprised so Amazon come to this business now, because it's intellectual people, smart people, Microsoft, Amazon, Boeing, and other people sick and tired from this low class, from this moron with IQ close to 60. When this will be stopping? Why we come right now to one-party system with a pure fascism? And I'm sick and tired from this. And I am a Jew. And nobody have more in this planet pain than Jew for last few thousand years. But I'm sick from this. You understand what I'm talking? So from this political ideology, what as I said before from Soviet Union, and my parents see this from German Nazi, I'm sick from this. We need a normal, intelligent people who understand what has been common sense. It brings us back to normal life. We lose everything for last year because it's exactly what has happened. It's a pure fascism, but this fascism by idiotic, I call this fascism with idiotic face. It's all freaking idiot right now. Stand up right now, everybody who can listen to me, and start choice people who understand what has been common sense, who are real American, who respect Constitution, freedom of speech, open public and doesn't court decision. When this will be open, stand up, America. Thank you very much.
Mr. Zimmerman? Renton has a city council meeting at 6 o'clock on Monday nights if you're looking for a new audience.
No, I go to many cities. Problem not about Renton, Bellevue, or this, because I live in
Okay.
Bellevue for 25
Thank
years.
you.
No, I understand this. I before in Renton too. I'm sick
Okay.
from idiot.
Thanks.
Exactly. This is brainwash
So-
ideology.
Thank you.
Freaking idiot.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. I very appreciate it.
Okay. Nobody tell Ed Prince about that, okay? We're sworn to secrecy. Okay. I apologize. I've got to get back on the agenda here. Yeah, I recognize that. You know, he did admit it's a performance. So we are now going to get on to actually a very serious topic. And also I want to talk a little bit under council business and new initiatives about two individuals who have served this community really well over decades, whom we've lost in the last couple of weeks. So once we get through this report from our police department, I'm going to kick it over to Mr. Miyake and let him introduce.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. If I could ask Assistant Police Chief Kaline to come to up to the table here. What we have in store for you tonight is just an update on what's been happening with respect to hate crimes in the city of Bellevue. In particular, some situations where we had some anti-Semitism events reported to the police department, as well as we've heard some oral testimony at the council as well. And with that, I'm going to go just ahead and turn it over to Assistant Chief Kaline to do a brief PowerPoint and to answer any questions you might have. Carl?
Great, thank you for having me. So it looks like we have our PowerPoint queued up. So I reviewed the October 14th council meeting video and was delighted to spend some time with Mr. and Mrs. Letoff tonight. And their message is powerful, and it is something that we know deep in our hearts that we have to keep up on top of, because hatred and racism is a very slippery slope. It's very insidious. It takes over lives. It destroys lives. A year ago yesterday was the atrocity that occurred in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, in which 11 lives were lost and 6 others seriously injured in the actions of a madman. And in that particular incident, the shooter is believed to have been radicalized online. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, briefly in the next 10 minutes, are hate crimes and bias-related trends. Briefly explain what's the difference between a hate crime and a bias-related incident. Incident types, the categories that we see here in Bellevue. The targeted group types, and case example of Anti-Semitic Flyers that occurred a few weeks ago. And then I'll wrap up with a brief overview of our very strong, solid partnerships with the community, other law enforcement agencies, and some non-governmental organizations. So turning your attention to the slide, you can see that 2016 was a spike in reported incidents. We believe that this is due in part to election issues, but also this was the end of the first year that we had established 6 citizen advisory councils, and we had been very regularly going out to the community and promoting what it is that police officers do, and more importantly, we are only as good as what the community reports to us. So we were explaining what is the difference between a hate crime and a bias-related event, and we didn't want them to figure out which was which. We just wanted them to report it to us, and we would take it from there. Reports can be made online, and the next slide will briefly show you how to do an online report, in person at our station offices, and of course by calling 911. So a hate crime consists of a racial or other slur coupled with an assault or property damage. So you need the reprehensible racist statement and then either an injury, an attempted assault, or actual property damage. The crime can be directed toward a victim's race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, or anyone that has a physical, mental, or sensory disability. A bias-related event is more nuanced, less complex. It is typically in the form of bigoted words that are yelled out of a passing car to somebody that's walking on the street, words that might be, go home to where you're from, or you're going to be deported soon. We want to hear about those incidents as they occur so that we can potentially identify the person and figure out what it was that caused them to say what they said so that we can put them on our radar. Recent hate crimes committed in Bellevue were typically assaultive behaviors, so these are the actual crimes, coupled with racial slurs. Frequently, the perpetrators were either under the influence of some intoxicant or experiencing mental illness. The most recent event took place on September 11th at the Downtown Transit Center. In that particular incident, an African-American executive got off the bus with his white female coworker, and they noticed that an angry white man was yelling at them and was getting closer to them. He was using the N-word, and he clearly took issue that in his perception there was a white female with an African-American male, and then he threatened to assault them. So in that particular case, the victim made a report online. We got word of that report later that day. It went to the detectives. They grabbed video from the transit center. They recognized the person. They made the arrest, interviewed him, and booked him to the King County Jail, where he was charged with a felony hate crime offense. So, online reporting. Easiest way to do it is go to Google, type in the search bar Bellevue Police Online Reporting. The very first thing that pops up is Report a Crime Online, City of Bellevue. Make sure it's not Bellevue, Nebraska, because there is another Bellevue. There's a couple of Bellevues.
There are.
And once you click on that link, it will take you to our Bellevue Police website. You can recognize the patch there, and then right in front of you is a link to click on to start a report. Once you click on that, there are radio buttons that you can click on to fill out the report. The first one is for the bias-related event. So, incident types. So, harassment would include the racial or religious slurs if coupled with threats of harm or actual harm, like I mentioned earlier. The fact that someone yells out a racial slur does not automatically mean that a crime has occurred. A lot of folks that we contact say, well, why isn't it a crime? Well, there's a First Amendment, and even though it's boorish, reprehensible, and racist and bigoted, it doesn't mean that somebody can't say that. It's the behaviors that manifest themselves along with the words. And our message to the community is to report all biased incidents to us so that they can be investigated and tracked. What you can see is there was a lot of vandalisms that were occurring in 2016. 4 or 5 of those were swastikas, very crudely drawn on bus shelters, on the sidewalk. We actually made arrests. They were 14 and 15-year-old juveniles that were bored, and they were referred to the juvenile prosecutor for adjudication. You can see that we are on a positive trend here where the bias-related events are getting fewer and far between, and ultimately we would like to see that number at 0. Targeted group types, this is going back through 2016. You can see that African Americans are disproportionately targeted in our community, and followed closely by our Muslim brothers and sisters, our Jewish citizens, and the LGBTQIA residents that we have here in Bellevue. So anti-Semitic flyers were posted on October 12th. It was a Saturday. It was the same day, later that day, that Redmond had asked us for assistance at the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. There was a renowned national speaker that was talking about immigration and civil rights and being targeted by extremist groups. We don't know who posted those flyers at the two of the three gun stores in Bellevue. But the flyers themselves were caricatures of what the author purported to be a Jewish man. It also talked about Jewish people that had been involved lately in headlines related to assaults. And the tagline was, "We have more to fear from Jewish people than we do from AR-15s." And the bottom of it was directing people to go to their website, and you can see the website up there on the top left. It's clearly a white extremist website where we scroll through it, and there's a number of lies that are being purported, including Tulsi Gabbard committed suicide, which clearly did not happen. But people getting on there, they think it's a mainstream website, but it's actually driving people towards this separation of white nationalists and everybody else. The investigation was initiated when Wade's Guns called us. Low Price Guns noticed the flyer. They called Wade's and said, "Hey, do you have any flyers outside?" And they went, and sure enough, there were. So we were able to obtain some fingerprints on those flyers, and the investigation continues. Now, there's nothing in that actual flyer that would potentially be illegal. However, we want the distributors of that flyer to know that we know who they are. And as you can see, the ADL graphic in the lower right shows that between 2017 and 2018, you can see that the propaganda leafleting has exponentially increased. Community partners. We have had and enjoy a very robust relationship with our local rabbis. We have invited them into the police department, shown them how we operate, and more importantly, they invited us into their synagogues. There are a number of interfaith events that occur in the Bellevue area, specifically in Bellevue. We talk about how to keep their congregations safe. We also include principles of how to stand up and be an ally in public, but do so in a safe manner after you've already notified the police that something is bubbling up, so that we can be oriented and responding. The Anti-Defamation League is an international organization. The national group, and specifically the Seattle branch of the ADL, is a clearinghouse of information for law enforcement and for citizens. You can get on there, you can read about these extremist groups, how they were first formed, what they stand for now, and more importantly, how they are modifying their stance to potentially ingratiate themselves with more mainstream people. The Safe Washington is an initiative of the Jewish Federation of Seattle, and they send reports to us about events, vandalisms, assault of people, that are identified by local law enforcement in the state of Washington. And the center picture there is a picture I took when I had the great fortune of being selected to attend the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia in early 2018. The highlight of that 11-week program was spending an entire day at the National Holocaust Memorial in DC. They shut down the whole venue for the 225 of us from around the country and around the globe, and with the docents there that are either survivors of the Holocaust or survivors of the descendants of the survivors. They pointed out all of the meaningful artifacts and, more importantly, the vivid photos that were taken back then. And they were very quick to point out the local law enforcement that were assisting in the roundup and extermination. And We then went into the auditorium after spending about 2.5 hours in the memorial, and then had another 2.5 hour lecture on American law enforcement, what we stand for, and especially how we can recognize the signs if in fact we end up starting to slide towards a bad place. And I think with what we have here locally in the city of Bellevue, regionally in the Puget Sound area, and statewide with our citizen community, non-governmental organizations, and rabbis, and most importantly, the men and women that make up the Bellevue Police Department, we are in a very good place to spread hope and peace, reduce crime, reduce the fear of crime, and enhance the quality of life for all who call Bellevue home.
Good, thank you. This was added to the agenda tonight. It was a result of a couple of different things, but at the very time that Dr. and Mr. Leto were here to testify, I think 2 weeks ago or maybe it was 3 weeks ago, we received notification about this. I know that police contacted and got in touch with the synagogues and really wanted to have this simply to show the reaction that we have here in Bellevue to this, the importance that we place on it. It is something that I know in terms of the vision that we have for this city. It is incredibly important of all of the Bellevue City Council members, and it's incredibly important to the leadership to have this city that is safe for individuals, no matter creed, color, orientation, and other things. I'm going to ask that since we've got a couple of things that were added tonight, if we go with one, we're going to go with 7. And so I'd like to leave it at that for tonight. But I thought it was really important to let a little time go by, but to then come up and have this discussion so that the public could hear it. So thank you very much. Okay. We have 2 other items that that can be handled under council business and new initiative. One is the loss of Jim Ellis, and the other, who many people in the area know, and I understand Patrick Foran he's in the back hiding behind, and I'm going to ask Patrick if he would want to come up and say a few words. I know that several council members have asked to say a few words about Jim, and I'll certainly honor that. I would again, just given the you're cash.
I'm sorry?
You're casual tonight. I know that several council members have asked. I'd ask that we kind of hold it down to that 60-second level. But Patrick, I wanted to give you an opportunity here.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Chelmenick, Deputy Robinson, and rest of council. It would be very helpful for the public to know, and some of you who were on council at the time, and some of you who are not, to know about. Our involvement with Mr. Jim Ellis was very helpful and gratifying. The Mercer Slough Environmental Education Center is one example of our involvement with Mr. Ellis. For those of you who don't know, a very large percentage of that project came from non-city funds. And one of those was directly related to Mr. Jim Ellis's involvement. He was instrumental directly in getting $1 million in funding for that project. But I would also let you know, I'm sure that most people don't know, and this is a lot of examples of Jim Ellis. He called me one day about 10 years ago and gave me the story, or one of the stories, of the origins of Chisholm Beach Park, because he lived nearby there. And it had to do with a neighbor lady that owns some of the original properties that ultimately became Chisholm Beach. And he relayed the whole story and conversation that he had with her about how she wanted that property to make sure that it was left to the public. And he thought, after this has got to be 60 years or more, that we ought to recognize that. And so he thought we should put a bench in Chisholm Beach Park in her name, and we did, and he paid for that bench. And he made it absolutely clear that he wanted no one to know how that bench got there, and that he was responsible for that. And that was the kind of fellow that Jim Ellis was, and the one that we knew. And I just thought that I wanted to stop by. I got a text from Shelley McBain that you might be saying some nice things about him, and I thought I would stop by and use this venue to pay my respects.
Thank you. As a Bellevue resident, he was very important to the Bellevue Park, so I appreciate you stopping by, and really good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to say just a very brief moment about Jim Ellis. He is a civic hero. There are people who have broad shoulders who change this community. He is one of them, and he is at the top of that list of the greatest of all time. You know, Metro, Lake Washington didn't have blue waters, it was brown. The sewage was just dumped into it. That includes sewage that came from Bellevue. He made sure that that got cleaned up, and it formed Metro, which was a really important government to carry forward within this region. Most near and dear to my heart is he had an incredible vision for the I-90 corridor that led to the Mountains to Sound Greenway that now spreads into eastern Washington. It was a concept that was bigger than could be done. And not only did he share that vision, he went out and got it done. And as Patrick mentioned, the work that he did on the Mercer Slough. One of the proudest photographs that I have is standing with him at the groundbreaking. Phil Noble is in it. Grant Egginger is in that picture. Conrad Lee is in that picture. It was a great day. And we truly had the chance to be with a true hero of the Pacific Northwest. Kaline, I know you wanted to say. I had Conrad ask to say something, and I think John had asked. And I'll let anyone who wants to weigh in say something about Jim.
Thank you very much. I actually didn't know Jim, but I know his brother, John Ellis, and my sympathies are with John and his family. He also is just a tremendous family all around.
Conrad?
Jim Ellis, he's one of the great regional leaders, if not the greatest. He exemplifies his own definition of leadership, which is, in his words, vision and action, important action. He's the father, like the mayor said, of forward thrust. He led the movement. You know, most of you young enough probably don't know that, forward thrust. That movement changed the whole region. He cleaned up Lake Washington. Lake Washington has signs in the lake, do not swim. Mm-hmm. And now it's clean. The cleanest ever is. Everybody swims there. And he led in the public transportation system, Metro, he established that. And that also cleaned up the lake, obviously. It's a regional, really it's a regional solution, regional thinker. And obviously, John also mentioned, he led the Mountain to Sound Greenway project, very much committed to environment and environmental stewardship. As a result, Bellevue's Mercer Slough, like Patrick said, environmental center benefited immensely, and I still agree with you. In the picture with him, that's just amazing. He already retired at that time, but he's still very active, very involved. So indeed, we will miss his leadership, and I hope that he has set example to most of us, understanding the meaning of leadership, vision, and action. We'll miss it.
Thank you. Mr. Stokes?
Yeah, really appreciate Councilmember Lee's full description of that and your conversation. I didn't know him, I met him, but I I knew him more through his brother John, and I talked to him one time at a Special K breakfast, which I don't have anymore, here at least. He was talking about, he loved, John Ellis liked to talk about, baseball and the Mariners, but he also talked about his brother and what happened to get Downtown Park and his, all the efforts in that. So, and ever so often other people have talked about him. So he's one of these people know him, knew him, and as you said, he was just a real pillar of the community and left us things we don't even quite know yet and appreciate yet. So I'm glad we're honoring his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Robertson.
Thank you. Yeah, my heart goes out to Jim Ellis's family. He really was one of the primary leaders to shape this region, and his work is still being felt today. I mean, people have mentioned the Mercer Slough, the Downtown Park Forward Thrust, the pools, Mountain to Sound Greenway, which we're doing the missing link. All these projects, the parks and the trails, Washington Convention Center, are still providing amazing public benefits to this day. And to have a legacy like that is just tremendous. Yet he never held elected office. I read that he was offered the first director of the Environmental Protection Agency by the president at the time. He turned it down because he wanted to serve Washington better rather than the nation. So I just, my heart goes out to them. What a loss, and what a tremendous gift his life was and will continue to be to this community.
Ms. Zahn, did you have anything to say, or Mr. Newenhouse? Okay, thank you. Really terrific individual. Mentioning Mountains to Sound Greenway, unfortunately on November 20th, when they have their big annual gala, I am going to be out of town on business. I believe you're going to be out of town on business. And with the Mountains, with the spur, or the phase one of the property, City Council gets an opportunity to go up on the stage at that and put that up on the marker of the wall. I cannot tell you I've waited 16 years to do that, and I'm going to be out of town, unfortunately. But I do want to make sure that we have a good contingent there to do that. So if you haven't seen that and signed up, please do. And I think this will also be a great time to honor Mr. Ellis at that event, so thank you for that. We also lost a good friend of Bellevue and a good friend of the King County Library System, and a former Bellevue resident, Bill Potasek. Ms. Robertson handles our library board and appointments, so I've asked her to say a few words about Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, Bill Potasek died last week of cancer at the age of 69. He was the director of the King County Library System for, to do my math here, 25 years, 1989 to 2014. During his 25-year tenure, he earned King County Library System a place at the forefront of public libraries nationwide, including being named Library of the Year in 2011 by the National Library Journal. Under his watch, we opened the downtown Bellevue branch in 1993, which has become the busiest library west of the Mississippi. He also oversaw other community branches, including major updates and improvements in Bellevue, including Newport Way and Lake Hills. After leaving the library system, he was named CEO of Calgary Public Library, but he stepped down from that post earlier this year, and he died last Tuesday, October 15th. And he was a tremendous partner to Bellevue. He made sure that the library system was a tremendous partner with Bellevue, and he really saw a lot of the significant changes that have made the library systems more useful, more accessible, and more helpful to the entire community. They really are the third place, as well as a place to do research, a place to get books, online books, in-person books, and to do so many other things. So he also has had a big impact on our community and will be missed. Thanks.
Mr. Stokes, quickly.
Yeah, real quickly, a couple of things. When I first ran in 2011, I had a chance to go talk to Bill at the library system, and he just spent a lot of time with him. It was really great just to get to know him and learn about the system and everything else. And the one last picture of him that's indelibly burned in my mind is going over to a Cascade Bike event in Seattle, going over I-90 across the bridge. And I looked over, and there were two people on a bike, and they're all in their gear and everything. And it was Bill Potasek and Ron Scher, and they were just racing each other across there. That was fantastic. So I remember him from that. And he was just a great friend and a great asset for the community. And it's really sad he died so young, but he just left a great legacy here, as Councilmember Robertson mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a Bellevue collection here. We also have a Bellevue collection of libraries. We have 4 of them in the city, which I think is outstanding. So thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for allowing us to spend a few minutes on that. We are now moving to something that, quite honestly, I'm very excited about, and it's about Metro Transit, which I think is very nice in tying that back to Mr. Ellis. This will be a briefing on the new Rapid Ride Kaline, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Miyake to do the introductions, and let's get into it.
Sure. That was actually a pretty good introduction leading up to Joyce and the staff joining us at the table. As you mentioned, it was the new Rapid Line Kaline, which is a new route between Totem Lake Center and the South Kirkland Park and Ride, downtown Bellevue, and the Eastgate Park and Ride. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to Joyce Nichols to introduce our panelists in front of you this evening. This is for information only. We're not looking for any formal direction from the council. I believe that the Metro is looking for any feedback the council may have, though, with regard to their presentation tonight and the information about the K-Line. So, Joyce?
Thank you. Good evening. And joining us tonight at the table are our Transportation Director, Andrew Singalakis, and Chris O'Clair. And Chris is the Mobility Division Director for King County Metro Transit. And she, again, is going to provide some information on this Rapid Ride Line K. And that's hard to say. So, but she does it very fast. And one of the things to think about is this line is proposed to go into service around 2025. And if you look out ahead in the transit and transportation arena, we're looking at Eastlink in 2023, I-405 Bus Rapid Transit in 2024, and this K-Line in 2025, plus a myriad of other projects that are going to be happening in the city through that time period. So we have a lot going on, and we thought it was important to bring tonight the efforts that Metro's going through right now to inform people about this, get a stakeholder group together. In doing the Rapid Ride Line B in Bellevue, they worked very closely with our staff in the transportation department, and they're doing the same thing here. So it's an exciting thing to think about another Rapid Ride line coming here, and I'll turn it over to Chris to give the presentation.
Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Chris O'Clair, and it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. I get the pleasure of being the Mobility Division Director at Metro, and I'm here to talk to you about the K-Line, but I want to let you know that Metro is here to come anytime. You are, the second largest city in King County, and I welcome coming back. We had a wonderful conversation with Brad and Andrew and Joyce. Rob Gannon, myself, and Diane Carlson came out, and I think that was last week. We are about to embark in many efforts in Bellevue, and we want to make this a collaborative effort. So tonight, while I talk to you about the K-Line, we would like to come out to talk to you about really what it means to be a mobility agency and really what it means to be investing in getting people to the opportunities they need to get to, and that's really about public transportation. I also want to point out tonight with me today is Vic Stover, who's the K-Line program manager, and Hannah McIntosh, who is our Rapid Ride program manager. I can't be more proud of our Rapid Ride team. What we're doing and delivering on the Rapid Ride program is just phenomenal, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So let's kick it off. I'll run through a couple slides real quick. Joyce had described there's a lot happening on the east side But I first want to thank all of you. Many of you have been involved in the RTC. Many of you have been involved in the East Side Transportation Partnership. And some of you have been involved in the Puget Sound Regional Council. All of those efforts have come together with input from all of the local jurisdictions to put together what we call Metro Connects. That is our long-range plan of where we're going as a region around public transportation. And represented by, it's really difficult to see on this map, are 26 rapid ride lines, a whole network centered around fast, frequent service, not just express services, but all-day express services. And finally, it's that investment in things that are not just the bus. Things that you're seeing out at our Eastgate Park and Ride, such as Ride 2, which is a first last mile pilot that we're looking at. But it's also services that we partner with people like HopeLink and others around on the county to provide other types of services other than a bus. So what is a rapid ride program about, and what's the Kaline? We always like to start pretty broad, is that rapid ride is really our bus rapid transit system. It's a high capacity, frequent, reliable bus system that really changes the way people move in King County. And a couple of things that I want to point out is that customers are saying that they want a service that is easy, they can just show up and go. So what does that require? It requires buses to come at least every 15 minutes. We're looking at every 10 minutes for rapid ride services in the peak period because people don't want to schedule. They just want to be able to show up and go. We're making sure that the rapid rides are safer and more accessible, that we really put in the amenities that are needed for the passenger facilities, for the speed and the reliability, that we're making sure it's comfortable and convenient with lighting and real-time information, and most importantly, that it connects our communities. Right now, we have 6 rapid ride lines, the B line being one that goes through your jurisdiction. And those 6 rapid ride lines represent 18% of the ridership in King County. It's a pretty big deal. And it actually represents about the same amount of ridership of our light rail system. So this is a system that is meant to come in and be what I like to call is the real trunk of our system and really collaborate and coordinate with what ST is also investing. So what are we looking at? I've described that there's 6 lines that we have now, is that we're looking at 7 more lines by 2027 that are represented here. Just to give you a brief overview, the H line from Burien through Delridge to downtown Seattle is a partnership with the City of Seattle that does include some Seattle Transportation Benefit District funds. The G line that is the Madison Valley to downtown Seattle is in 2022. The I line, which we have a lot of efforts going on down in what we call our R Camp, Renton, Kent, Auburn. And then next, what we're looking at is the R and the J line with the City of Seattle partnership through Roosevelt up north and then down south through Rainier Beach. The K line being in 2025. And I'll talk to you more about the timing as Joyce had described it. There are a lot of things coming on the east side that we need to make sure we're well coordinated on, because while that represents the K line one moment, there are many steps and many changes to get us there and investments that will be coming before that time period. Kind of talked briefly about this, but what is Rapid Ride? It's really us coming in with an enhanced capital and service investment that we do with the jurisdictions in the area. And so it includes enhanced stations. As you can see here, we actually have a new station design that's going to be rolled out with these new lines so that it better meets our customers' needs. Not just real-time information, but making sure they're safe and secure and making sure they're accessible from everyone. Not just meeting the ADA requirements, but going above and beyond that. We bring in a whole fleet that hopefully will be even greener and cleaner as we move forward, as we're looking at making our investments in the future all being electric. It will require speed and reliability investments that I'll talk to you more about. And then there's a whole service and operating plan that I'm going to talk to you about. Finally, there's a branding. It sells because people can see and feel it much more like a standard line, much more like a light rail line, because of the amenities, but the branding associated with it really attracts customers in a different way. So what does it mean to have the capital investments? This is all about providing an enhanced customer experience. It's making sure that the service is fast and reliable. And this is where we really need the partnerships of the jurisdictions. So as we're going to be bringing, and I'll show you some of the dollar investments that we're bringing forth, we're going to be looking to coordinate with all of you as you're looking at changing your streets and changing and working with developers around how, if you're opening up sidewalks or right-of-way, how we can do it together to bring in all the investments around the capital at the same time. So first off, I kind of described this a little bit, but passengers facilities, this is something that we, in our previous rapid ride lines, is not just about dropping a shelter in there. It's really about making sure that people can get to the system. We're looking at bringing better route maps, enhanced shelters, lighting, and then it's that real-time information. People have their smartphones, but customers want to see when that next bus is. Half the time I'm on my phone texting and I can just look up and see 3 minutes away. And that causes, we know in our customers, a decrease in anxiety and an ability to more rely on the service because they can see when it's coming. We also know that there has to be better accessibility so that we can bring more people into the system. As I said, this drives a high amount of ridership, but how do we get people into the rapid ride? One important thing is that we look at the land use and the density around this. We want to partner with all of you of jurisdictions to make sure that we bring in more of a transit-oriented development communities around it, but that we also bring in the local bus service around it. We bring in other types of services, whether it's first and last mile pilots, whether Uber and Lyft, or whether it's park and ride facilities, to get people into the rapid ride. This is a major investment, and in order to drive the ridership that we want to make sure that it's really accessible. I've talked a little bit about the safety and security and the access to the transit, but really what we're looking for on the speed and reliability is a real understanding that this service needs priority in the right-of-way. It needs the ability so that it can be competitive. It doesn't get stuck in the traffic, that can have the ability to move through the intersections with transit signal priority, and that people on the bus feel that there's a real advantage to being on the bus rather than being stuck in traffic. Those are conversations that we know are not just about with the jurisdictions, but also with the local businesses. I want to be really clear that that is a partnership that we're looking, and probably the biggest partnership we're looking at working with our jurisdictions. And with this line, it's with you in the city of Kirkland, really understanding how can we show that value in order to get that right away that we're going to all need. And then we're going to be bringing in a lot of technology. There's Wi-Fi on our buses. There's technology associated with the stations. How do we do that, especially as you're looking at upgrading your systems and your roadways so that we don't have to redig up the roadway. We can do it together. So what is the Kaline? Is it going to click? Thanks. I appreciate that, Vic. So, as was described earlier, it connects Eastgate down south through downtown Bellevue to Totem Lake. And I can hopefully click this. Thank you. This connects Eastgate, being one of the largest hubs in our system, where we have one of the largest park and rides in our system. And I just learned the third largest college in Washington State. So thank you so much, Bellevue College, for reminding me of that. I'm just blown away. That is just a phenomenal investment that I'll talk to you guys about that we have to connect. It connects what is known as our Route 271 with a new route that's coming, the Route 250. So it is really interlinking two of these areas. It then will connect up through the Bellevue Transit Center, as there's a lot of investments around Link Light Rail and that connection. And then finally up through South Kirkland, through the Kirkland area. With this, we will be talking to you in the next couple years, next couple months through the next year, about what the alignment should be. So this map represents a high-level schematic understanding of what we want to connect, but it doesn't have the exact network mapped out. We are in conversations with Kirkland, and we know that you also will be involved in where the alignment is in Kirkland and whether we should, and how should we be connecting up north through the Totem Lake facility. But more importantly, how in the city of Bellevue are we connecting with the Transit Center and Link Light Rail? And then how are we making the turn movements and the priorities connecting all the way down through Eastlake? These are important pieces that we can make sure that we get at some of our, what I call our pillars around safety, sustainability, how can we get the most amount of people on this, reduce the most amount of cars, and equity. How are we serving the most amount of people that are in greatest need for these types of services? This aligns with the Bellevue transit plan, but I had a really nice conversation with Bellevue staff about how can we update that plan as we're coming in with these types of investments in the area. But what does this mean about the future? And Joyce described this. We are coming out to your community now. This is the beginning of the conversation, and Vic has already been out talking to many organizations. But what we are saying is that the Beeline was a very big investment that we are going to continue to work with you to refine, because we have to bring more people into the system through the Beeline, and we have to commit to building a better, more robust system associated with this corridor. As we do this, Sound Transit, the Blue Line, is coming in 2023. So before that comes on board, starting early next year, we want to begin conversations on how we restructure services in Bellevue in order to align with the Blue Line. But at the same time, we're going to be having conversations about how we can be serving the BRT system on I-405. This BRT system and the Blue Line do not work unless local transit service is actively connecting to it and restructuring so that we can bring more people into the high capacity system. It is absolutely critical that we do that. And at the same time, we're going to be setting the alignment of the K line. So the first step that we need to do in order to make all this work is come out to your communities and begin conversations that don't just lead us into the K line, but really lead us into the 3 major capital investments around public transportation. And I'm really proud to say that King County Metro and Sound Transit, and I know many of you have gone through many discussions, are better aligned than they've ever been. Diane Carlson and I meet on a regular basis, and we have invested real staff around this. And when we're talking about coming in and investing in services, we're also looking at capital improvements, not just in the K line, but also in better passenger facilities, on access to transit, on better speed and reliability improvements so we can get more people into the system, even before we've set the network. We know the major arterials through your transit plan that we need to be investing in. We know where their buses are, even though we might not know the exact alignment, and we need to begin those capital conversations now, not later, after the Blue Line comes in and the BRT system comes in. So what I'm committing to is that conversation around the K line and alignment, but more importantly, the early investments, the early discussions about how we can make the Sound Transit investments work for everyone. Real quick, you've heard tonight from our partner in Bellevue College about what we're doing in Bellevue College. Us and the city of Bellevue have committed $400,000, and the college has committed $100,000, and really looking at how can we serve this major important educational facility. It's important to the region and the state. And Rapid Ride does need to figure out a way in which they can better connect into the system. So I'm really proud that this study is really well timed. I think what it's going to do well is also get us lined up for major grants. The best thing you can do is to set up the study so that then, as many of you know, whether it's through the PSR3C or federal grants, you have that information ready. And then you show partnership in how you're moving together. Over the next year, we're going to be setting the route alignment for the K line. We're going to be looking at travel times, equity analysis, destinations that we're serving, network considerations, projected ridership. But I guess I really want to state that all of this requires community engagement. We don't know your community like you know your community. And this is where we need your help. And I'll talk to you about it in a few slides forward. So what is the K line? Right now, at about a 5% planning design, we think it's about a $90 million investment. We have been awarded some funds through the Regional Mobility Grant that have been secured. We have in our capital plan, our CIP, through King County Metro, about $45 million appropriated. And then we have a gap of about $40 million. So that's where we need help. We need help from you as a large jurisdiction in coming to the table and supporting us in grant processes and understanding what other partnerships can come to the table and understanding what and if you guys can contribute. Sometimes that comes in forms of dollars, sometimes a jurisdiction that comes in forms of right-of-way, sometimes that comes in forms of developers helping us think about how to build access to the system and helping us invest in some of the facilities. There's many ways that we can get to this target, but we are going to be actively working with you to help leverage some of those dollars. Phase 1 is the needs and priorities of the Kaline. It's through early 2020. By 2021, we need our alignment set in order to go through some of these federal grant processes. We'll be doing that through our King County Council, which I'll show you in our next slide. So here I am today. It's October 28th. We're at the city of Bellevue, but I want to stress that we are here to really make a commitment to building our relationship with you and continuing this conversation on what it means to be a good partner. We are committed to a community and making the community's voice heard and making sure that they're part of the decision. And we're committed to better defining our partnership roles, because in each one of these lines, it's a little bit different. What a partner can bring to the table varies based on who they are. So around community engagement, I'm really proud. We are really doubling down on an equitable perspective to making sure that those who traditionally haven't been heard have voices at the table. We have started stakeholder interviews, and I'm just going to read them off so that you guys can hear them in Bellevue. And I just want to do a big shout out to our Kaline team with the Kirkland Boys and Girls Club, Hope Link, At Work, Attain Housing, Chinese Information Services Center, Youth Eastside Services, Bellevue Downtown Association, the Kirkland Chamber, the Kirkland Downtown Association, Catholic Community Services, Bellevue College, as I've already described here tonight, and many others. But we want to hear from you. I would ask that we work together to identify those areas, because we don't, as I described, know the communities like you know the communities. We are beginning a phase 1 community survey that on the Kaline that we want to begin to hear from people, and we want to launch that as early as November. And so we need your help getting the word out associated with this. So the combination of helping us connect with communities and then getting the word out is going to be a big part of the partnership effort as we move forward. So what does it mean to work together? I've talked a little bit about communications and engagement with local communities. We will be available to come to any of your meetings. We have a very robust staff that is eager to be out here. They like to be out in the community. That's where we are part of public transportation because we believe in it, and we want to hear about how to make it work for the customers. We are committing to an ongoing coordination between your city and the city of Kirkland, Sound Transit, and at the table. We welcome joint meetings. We know as the blue line is coming forth, we will be doing joint outreach, as the 550 is one of the largest investments associated with that, and will be a change to your riders. But we want to make sure that when Metro and Sound Transit are looking at transit planning, that it is a very coordinated effort. We have just begun that with the NorthLink project, and that's going very well, also with community transit and the other partners that serve this area. And we want to make sure we support effective transit connections, and whether that's through investments in access, investments in new and innovative types of services, investments with your employers. We talked the other day about I have a very robust team that every major employer gets a call once a month from my team to talk about what are the employer's needs, whether it's around our Passport Orca program, around their shuttles, around their innovative, and what are we doing in their communities in order so they have an understanding of transit planning. I'm very proud to say that Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft still actively purchase service from us because they believe in the value of public transportation. So we want to make sure that you guys have that conversation with us around your employers, as there's many employers that are choosing Bellevue as being a great regional center. And we want to make sure we build that public transportation investment with them around that. And then finally, we want to make sure we design and build the capital. I've talked about the dollars, but we want to make sure it meets your feeling and culture and amenities that Bellevue's about. And I think that's one commitment is we are going to make sure that we do this together so it reflects your communities. I've gone very quickly through this because I know you've had a long meeting. I speak very quickly, so I apologize. But we're here to listen. I just want to show the commitment on behalf of King County Metro and leadership that this has to be a joint partnership. And the first step is really beginning the conversation around services, the future of transit planning, and then setting the K-line alignment so that we can work towards a locally preferred alternative that is needed for a lot of our federal grants and state grants to make sure we can set that alignment. So thank you so much, and I welcome any questions and discussions.
Do you have anything to add, Andrew or Joyce? Okay, so I just want the record to reflect that October 28th, 2019, Metro staff said they want to come to Bellevue City Council meetings. My work here is done. We want you to come too. We're very excited about this. I will say in 16 years there have been a couple of meetings that were rocky, but we're very excited about this. What I'm going to do with council members, I'm going to start with Council Member Lee, both as our transportation liaison and as a former member of the RTC. Then, just so people know it, I'm going to kind of zipper this up and down. So we'll go back and forth, go to finally on that to Mr. Stokes, then back over to the Deputy Mayor and myself for final wrap-up. Okay, Mr. Lee.
Mr. Mayor, great report. I'm so impressed that you start with saying you want to work with the local jurisdictions. That's great. And also you talk about community engagement. That's just as good, even better. And also you talk about not just services is important and capital, investment. I think these are all real great ways to approach the project. So I'm very impressed, and as you mentioned, this is a tremendous, important connection. I'm surprised that you already have 18% of the ridership. That's very good. And you mentioned you want to invest in culture things. It's just going to be a gist, so don't take it seriously. That means we can actually build aquatic center by Metro as a culture facility. No. We're not that ambitious. We'll take a chance first. So anyway, so I'm really impressed. The thing you talk about really fits very much with our vision, the City of Bellevue. Our Transportation Commission, our city's Transportation Department has been working very hard on building some of those infrastructure you're talking about. We're talking about technology. We're talking about safety, reliability, speed. And technology, which we're looking at is, you probably, I don't need to repeat it, but the element of using technology can increase safety, reliability, and without waiting, if it's adopted in the public transportation system, it can provide all those features. But it takes some proof, takes some pilot program, and the City of Bellevue is trying to do a pilot program to see how we can build that into our transportation system. And so I hope that the Metro, can work with us very closely, and we're working, of course, to prove that we can do it. And it takes everybody to work together. So I really feel that this is a great beginning, and this is a proven system, and not to say that we can do away with sound transit if this works, but it complements. Especially you talk about local. This regional system doesn't work well unless you have the local accessibility. So all these are just great, wonderful things, and I'm really glad. I really don't have much to add except all the details you're talking about. But as I always said, devil is in the detail. So I appreciate you having a staff that's willing to talk to businesses. It's amazing that if you call them every week, say, how are you doing? I mean, I wish we could do that every week. with our constituents.
Yes.
We need, you can help us, right?
Chris, any comment on that?
Exactly. So I really
Yeah,
think this is great to start, and hopefully we can stick with this, and we're looking forward to working with you, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. And I should have reminded people, we delayed our start here a little bit with a couple of additional items. So if you can stay to close to the 3 minutes, then I can get my 9 minutes. Mr. Newenhouse. Just, please, just be aware.
Thank you so much for coming down tonight and giving us a great presentation. There's lots to like here. Local public engagement, the business engagement, the investing in our community, and I really appreciate you just calling out reflecting Bellevue's goals for transit. So I appreciate that in terms of the convenient, the frequent, the efficient, the simple, direct, and regionally connected. Question I had was establishing a new line. What's kind of the core criteria that you look for when you're establishing a new line? Which I think some people, they see this presentation and we're like, well, wasn't there a rapid line near me? So what's the core criteria that you look at before trying to establish a new line?
That's a great question, and it's one thing that we looked at with Rapid Ride. And first, I want to start with that when we kind of look at where we're distributing services per our service guidelines that are out there now, is that we look at productivity. And productivity is represented by ridership, but it's also represented by land use. So there might not be a route there today, but we know that if we put a frequent route out, that it could generate a lot more public transportation around that. Number two is that we look at how they're distributed. We know that we can't just run every rapid ride in the city of Bothell. I'll just pick that one for instance. That we need to make sure they're distributed. And then most importantly, where our values are is we're really looking at making sure that those that truly depend on public transportation and the value of social equity, and really looking at our minority and low-income, non-English speaking immigrant populations that might not be able to afford to have a car, have the values associated with fast, frequent service.
Right.
Because a half-hour service doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And in that, I would just say the other piece and element is it has to align with what the city did. So when we looked at our Metro Connects, that all aligned with where the cities are seeing the value of public transportation, because this service will not work without a partnership with the city.
Right.
So.
And being a marketing executive, I appreciate the branding that you have done. I think your stations in particular are very easy to identify. People know what it is. They understand the additional amenities. And all the stations do look like this. Is that correct?
They do, and we actually have kind of
Okay.
an even more enhanced look coming out with the new set of stations.
Oh, what does that look like?
That is the new station.
Oh, this is the new
Sorry,
station.
Hannah's always helping. In that
Okay.
picture, it represents, but what's on the street today with our current 6-line, thanks, Hannah. That station, it will have as a larger shelter facility, so it'll be easier to wait. We hope to have some more real-time actually integrated into the facility. You'll be able to tap on with your Orca reader. It'll be more accessible for people, not just in a wheelchair. But it still will have that great brand. It just will allow for more comfort and ease and safety as you're waiting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think my 3 minutes are up.
Oh, thank you very much. Ms. Robertson, you get 15 seconds yielded by Mr. Newenhouse.
Oh, excellent. So, it's funny because for the last 10 years, one of the things this council's priority has been to have better connectivity among the east side cities, not just back and forth across the lake. And as I'm looking at this map that's on, I'm not sure what page, that shows the transit network, we're getting there with this K line. It's really going to add between the B line, the blue line, the K line, and then the bus, or the BRT line on 405. We're going to really have an integrated east side. I think that's really critical, and I'm really excited about that. So, a couple of questions. On the, first of all, I wanted to voice my support, of course, to the Bellevue College, the yellow dotted line there, to make sure that it goes through the campus of our third largest college campus in the state. On that, but then also, are there any improvements planned for the Eastgate Park and Ride? I don't remember how many stalls it is. It's got between 1,500 and 2,000, I think.
It's about 1,800 stalls.
Okay.
Right now, we are looking at the Eastgate Park and Ride as a mobility hub, and we have a big study going out that the city of Bellevue has been involved in, and looking beyond just park and ride. And so really, bringing in multimodal points of transportation. How can you make it work for employer shuttles, for bikes, for first and last mile, for Ubers and Lyfts? And so we are doing a study. We don't have secured funding, but that study helps us lead to a better understanding and gets us more prepared for grants.
So I'd like to lend my voice to that. Someone in my household uses that park and ride every day. And the park and ride definitely could use more capacity, and I encourage this multimodal or mobility hub. I also, as you're doing that study, would you please look at how people drop off? Because if you are on the south side of I-90, there is no place to drop off. There's no place to turn around, and to get to the freeway station, it's a real problem. And so if the parking lot is full and someone needs to be dropped off, it'd be great if you guys could think about that in a holistic way. So that's just one comment. I would very much welcome check-ins with the Bellevue City Council as we move along, especially as we get towards decision points. I assume that our staff is fully briefed on the timing of when our input will be most needed. Do you have that on?
I do. And first off, this is the first of several briefings that we want to come and have with you, and we welcome any time. But we will be working really closely with Bellevue staff to make sure that it's well coordinated.
Okay, yeah, because it would be good to make sure that we can understand what the choices are and give you guys input in a timely way.
And we'd even like to bring some of the community interests so that you can directly hear from the communities and what their interests are in that.
That'd be great. And I don't know, you talked about getting together with the Kirkland Chamber. I would encourage you also to outreach to the Bellevue Chamber as well as the Bellevue Downtown Association, because they're two overlapping but not completely. In the Venn diagram, there's overlap but not complete coverage of those two organizations for the business groups. So I think that's all. I guess I had one question. Where the blue line ends in Redmond and the B line ends in Redmond, will those ever come together? It's this map right here.
Not as they're currently planned now, but
it seems like it would be.
It doesn't mean
useful.
that. And I'm sorry, I don't know the area well. It doesn't mean that can't be part of a conversation that we're having.
It might be nice if those dovetail for better mobility for folks. I know that's not in Bellevue, but I was just looking at the map, and it seemed like that would be a really good.
It is something we should look at as that investment comes forward.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Does that mean I can go? No, yeah, you can go now. Just missed. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Thank you. Obviously, I've been on the phone too much tonight.
Yeah, no kidding. Council members on.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this because I was a frequent rider of the 271. It was quite a milk run.
Yes.
Although I think that, and it is actually one of the few that connect Bellevue College with UW. So I think that's an important piece when we look at who is actually being served. And I really like the fact that looks like we're going to be updating our transit master plan and our frequent transit network that was established based on a 2030 growth scenario that may be a little bit different now than when we wrote it, 6 or 7 years ago. So I think that I'm excited about the work and the connection. When you think about the partnership, I would like us to also look at the Bellevue School District, because I think that a lot of our schools, especially at the high school, rely on transit, and also our human services, because I think sometimes our bus routes are not necessarily set up so that the folks that are looking for service can get there if they don't have a car. So I think that's another area. Right in downtown at the transit center, I think that is another mobility hub. And it absolutely has to work between light rail, BRT, and this Kaline coming in. So really looking and deeply understanding what is that pickup drop-off, how it all works. I had an opportunity to listen to Snohomish County talked about their transit and their rapid lines and how everything is coming together. And so I think it's a really exciting time in our community to get that. The fact that it's going to be frequent. I would like to understand a bit more about, you said it's going to be above the ADA, and I'm curious about how the bikes will work, whether when we think about rapid on and off, sometimes bikes, getting them in the front is not necessarily really quick. So was that going to be part of the discussion and design?
The bike is just another element of our multimodal that we welcome in those conversations.
Okay. And then when we talk about funding, so it looks like we are looking at about a year from now that we would be, so part of this is lining up where are the different grant potentials that we might want to start finding those partners and doing the advocacy, especially if we're talking about federal grants that may take a little while to get their attention. So
in
is there
order
a
for us
strategy for
to
that?
apply for the 2021, we need our alignment set for this FTA grant, but we will be starting this a year in advance and
Okay.
really setting up that understanding. As we know, federal dollars are not always confirmed, not even, so I just want to stress that while this says FTA small starts, there's a large discussion on can the jurisdictions bring something to the table? Can others bring something to the table associated with
Well,
this?
absolutely, we need to look at that. And then on the community engagement and outreach, I'm just thinking that right now we're actually doing a pretty big effort around the 2020 census already in terms of doing outreach. So if there's a way to even look at what that pathway is to reach people, and maybe that's a place to say, hey, we're looking at alignment, we'd love to get your feedback. Because those are, the hard-to-reach folks are not necessarily the ones that are coming to city council or meetings at night, so that might be another way to do some connection. Thank you.
Mr. Stokes.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the comments been made by my colleagues. I guess I can turn that on. One thing I did when you were talking reminded me, I'm really excited to see the communication so that people know that the bus is on the way. I was in England, Oxford and Bath and Exeter in 2006, and they were already doing that. I kept thinking, when are we going to get to that? So that's fantastic. And it really helps plan, and having them more frequent, obviously, is a great thing to do. Also want to compliment you on the, it's nice to have King County groups come over, or board, or offices and come over and recognize the size of Bellevue and the importance to the whole thing, so it's great. We're looking forward to a strong relationship with you, and I do, again, remembering back to some conversations at meetings, regional meetings, one over in Issaquah that former Mayor Fred Butler had about some of the transportation things. It was kind of the first time we began to see ST3, the cities and Metro bus all working together, and that's a huge change. And you're coming out here and really, I think, bringing forward all of this and talking to us more frequently is really fantastic. And we do have organizations, you already mentioned it with the East Side Transportation Partnership. We've had some great conversations there. And the other is, in addition to the Bellevue Downtown Association, is looking at, and it's a little bit different now, I think much more engaged in the community and really worked well on working the BRT, as I say, real BRT on 405, with the East Side, or Bellevue Chamber of Commerce, East Side Chamber of Commerce's transportation group. And so I think that's another piece of the puzzle. And of course, our bigger employers and companies here are, transportation is really important to them. So we have a lot of partners and all, and what is exciting is seeing you being a catalyst to actually bring the community and the region together more. So I applaud that, and I think we're on a good path, and look forward to working for you. And anytime we can bump those timelines up, that'd be good. And I'm really looking forward to the connection with our light rail. That's going to be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Chris, great presentation. You make taking the bus sound very exciting. Anytime you put your keys down, not worry about gas, traffic, or parking is a good day. But it's all about access. So I love this idea. I wish it were happening sooner. But there's a few things I hope that happen with this, is that Bellevue continues to have all the electric buses, like all cities will as well, but that we were, I think, a pilot project for that, and I'd love to continue that. I hope that King County Metro emphasizes TOD around the BRT nodes, like Mayor Chelmanek once mentioned, and included in that would be the affordable housing as well. I think that's important, and I hope that you work with commute platforms like Choose Your Way Bellevue or Loom And
we meet with both of them regularly, yes.
perfect, because that's, I think, what's going to really help people like me know the easiest way to get around without driving my car. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I've got like 10 bullets written down here, so I'm going to really go quick. The first is to my fellow council members, since indeed my work here is almost done. This work that you will do related to transit and mobility is as important or more important than the street work that we are going to do. And in fact, you need to think about when we widen a street or create a new street, what are we going to use on those lanes? What are those lanes going to be used for? We have an opportunity here because I really do think we're ahead of the curve on a lot of other cities. We have a transit plan. We can work with Metro to make capital investments. That's not all coming from Metro. That's going to have to come from us. So that becomes, I think, part of that sort of grand transportation plan that the city is working on. This is an opportunity to implement abundant access, which is the core of our transit plan. And I think, again, that was one of the smartest things the city has done among many smart things. We don't operate a transit system, but we created a transit plan. And frankly, Metro liked it so much, they adopted a lot of those principles within it. That capital investment I'm going to come back to is really important. I've got some meetings coming up with our federal delegation, so if we can get connected with Joyce, I'd love to have a couple of talking points about what we will need to handle growth on that. The transit center. The transit center in downtown is not going to be able to handle every single bus. That means how we use 112th, 110th, 108th, 106th, Northeast 4th, Northeast 8th. How we use those streets for transit is incredibly important, and it makes more of downtown a transit center. Because, and people will be able to get off and move to other spots. The work you're doing on last mile will really help enhance the concept of abundant access where we're running it on our main roads. But, and to Councilmember Robertson's point, if you can get people to find a way to get people to the Eastgate Park and Ride, to other places from the neighborhoods, you can do that for a lot less than a massive capital investment in adding stories to the to our park and ride. So I think that is a real important aspect of all of this. Also, as we move forward, we really need to continue to look at how we deal with 120th in that area, how we work with you to provide the infrastructure and make sure infrastructure is ready for a bus base that is there, but a bus base that handles all electric vehicles, which is really important. I happen to commute into and out of Kirkland every day. I'm glad I go into and out of Kirkland. I can tell you on those Kirkland streets that you're talking about, the traffic at rush hour, in particular evening rush hour, is very badly backed up. So I think as this moves forward, working with the city of Kirkland as to how they're going to handle that, I think will be really important and maybe a difficult discussion to have with Kirkland. Thanks for being here. We're on our way to really integrating transit into a full transportation plan. Like I say, there were over time, not everyone agreed with that in Bellevue. And I am really glad that we have a council and a leadership team that's moving in that direction. And so please come back frequently. If I see on an agenda you're coming back when I'm gone, maybe I'll come down and sit in the peanut gallery with you. They have told me they don't want to see me. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing us to come. Like I said, we are available and ready. I know this team is taking tons and tons of notes. And I guess I really want to state that we are a new organization under the leadership of Rob Gannon. I'm really proud to be part of King County Metro, not just because I believe in the services, but our employees are really committed. And so we are committed to come to Bellevue, but not just to the council. Let us know where we should be so we can hear those voices and really make the change in public transportation with sound transit like we need to do. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. What is the council's pleasure at this point? We have the road usage charge coming up. Do we want to take a few-minute break? That's going to be, I think, a fairly hefty discussion. Or are we good to continue plugging on? What's that? Take a break. So I'm going to ask people to really focus on a 10-minute break. Let's get everyone from DOT up here to get ready for the road usage charge. And so I'm going to ask people to be back here by 8:40. So we will be in a brief recess. Okay, we will come out of recess. Thank you all for the short break, and thank everyone for getting back on time. Next up, this is an update on the Washington State Transportation Commission Road Usage Charge pilot project, and you must say that slowly and distinctly. So, Mr. Miyake.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Just by way of background, this pilot was launched back in early 2018 and ended in January this year. Council was briefed on this particular topic last September of 2018 and expressed interest in finding out the results of the pilot project. So we're here this evening to joining us this evening is Rima Griffith, the Executive Director of the Washington State Transportation Commission, to provide us an update. Again, this is one which primarily just information to the council. No formal action is being required of the council this evening, as well as, if anything, any feedback would be appreciated. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Joyce.
And I'm going to, due to the lateness of the hour and the need to hurry up, I'm going to hand it right off to Rima.
Okay, well, thank you and good evening. I'll try to get through this as quick as possible. There'll probably be questions. I did not bring a lot of the slides you saw last year on kind of the problem statement and all that, so I'll kind of jump right into the pilot and how that worked and some of the feedback. And then the commission, just a couple weeks ago, issued some preliminary recommendations that are out for public comment now, and we'll be going to the legislature and governor and USDOT in January in a final report. So they'll be finalizing those at their December meeting. Just real quick, by way of background, a little reminder, in 2012, the legislature had directed the Transportation Commission to conduct an assessment of road usage charging and identify essentially a sustainable long-term revenue source for Washington State's transportation system and to transition away from the gas tax. So those were important directive words that we got over and over for the last almost 8 years as we've been doing this in-depth research and analysis. The basis of the assessment as follows is that we identified a RUC rate, a road usage charge rate, of 2.4 cents per mile, and that was arrived at by taking our current gas tax of 49.4 cents and dividing it by the 20 mile per gallon average statewide MPG of our vehicle fleet today to come up to the 2.4 cent per mile rate. Our pilot that we ran over the last year was a simulation of a real system. We did not collect real money. We've assumed revenue neutrality throughout this entire analysis and assessment. We were not charged with looking at what the future revenue needs are of the state and trying to identify a target by which we will try to hit with a rate. It was more about doing an apples-to-apples comparison of road usage charging against gas tax to determine the viability of it, the feasibility, and whether or not, frankly, it pencils and there's a business case to be made for such a transition over time. And lastly, we've assumed that drivers would pay either the road charge or the gas tax, but not both during a transitionary time. So the pilot project itself, as mentioned, was 12 months. It had 2,000 drivers from across Washington State that very closely matched our last census in terms of geographic distribution. We also had a small pool of drivers from the city of Surrey, British Columbia, talking about tongue twisters, and they're looking at a road usage charge potentially. So we started wondering what that would be like if two countries had to reconcile revenue by miles. So we had a very small pool of drivers there to begin looking at what the complications and implications of that could be. We had a very small number of drivers from the state of Idaho participate, also to do cross-border testing into eastern Washington, largely in the Spokane area and the Pullman area. And lastly, with Oregon Department of Transportation, we had a partnership in which we tested cross-border interoperability. Oregon does have an existing road usage charge program called Origo, and we had about 75 Oregon drivers who already had accounts in real money. And in this case, we did use real money with Washington drivers, about 30 of them from the Clark County area, participated, and they were given little gift cards, about $100 each, and they were told you needed to use this to pay your RUC bills. You were actually going to pay. And they had to use the GPS-enabled device because we needed to know when they were in Washington or Oregon and how many miles were in each state in order to do this test. All but one of them actually paid their bills with that card. One guy went to Walmart, but the rest of them did comply, and we had a great pool of participation. So with that said, we learned a lot, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Interoperability Hub, but it was very successful. And lastly, critical partners to us, Seattle Electric Vehicle Association and Plug-in America, were behind this and supportive of the pilot. So the state tested 5 different approaches to reporting or gathering miles driven. The 2 on the left are what we call low to no tech. You can do those without any technology. The mileage permit, only 1% of our 2,000 drivers signed up for that. It's basically like a prepaid cell phone where you would buy a block of miles and get a permit. And then in the pilot, on a quarterly basis, we asked folks to take a picture of their odometer and text it in so we could tell how many miles they drove and if their permit was still valid or if they needed to re-up for a new permit. Pretty easy to do. Not a lot of people liked it, probably because it would have required upfronting money in a real system. The second one above, the odometer reading, was probably one of our more popular ones by itself. It is a post-pay, very similar. In this case, drivers took a picture of their odometer at the start of the pilot, and then quarterly they were prompted again to take a picture using an app they could download for free that took a picture of their odometer on their dashboard. They texted it in, and we generated an invoice that was emailed to them. And on the invoices for all the participants, they were seeing a lot of detail we don't see today as drivers in terms of our transportation. They were seeing total number of miles driven in state and on public roadways. They saw how much they paid in gas tax, and they saw how much their RUC charges were. And then they saw if they owed money or if they got a credit, because in some cases people got credits if they overpaid in their gas tax. So if you think about it, when you're at the pump today, if you had parallel systems running, you'd be essentially prepaying your road charges if you were in the RUC system every time you're filling up. So you get a credit for those taxes. So odometer read, 28% of our participants chose that. To the right is where we employ technology. The Mile Mapper smartphone app was utilized, and we did cap participation at 14% because we had a lot of people who wanted to use the app. We developed this app. It was really a beta app developed with the University of Washington, but it worked quite well. And one of the interesting features of the app is it has a toggle switch to turn GPS on and off. And so what we see coming out of that is it could be a bridge technology, perhaps for people who might want to do the odometer read and not have GPS all the time, but don't want to pay taxes on those out-of-state miles when they do go out of state, or if they live on a ranch and put a lot of miles off of public roadways, they might be interested in having a way to somehow certify or assert that, X number of my miles each year is not eligible to be taxed. There will, I'm sure, be better things that emerge over the years as technology advances, but we see hope in that with the smartphone app, which worked quite well in the pilot. And lastly, on the bottom right, plug-in device with or without GPS. So there's actually 2 options there. You'll see a breakdown below the circle. 56% total of our participants did select this option where it plugs into your OBD2 port of your vehicle, which is just below your driver's steering wheel column. 37% selected that option with GPS enabled, and 19% selected it without. So when you combine that 19% with the 28% of the odometer reading, we had nearly half of our participants say no to GPS. We found that finding alone quite interesting, and one that very clearly we want to make sure lawmakers understand that we should not assume everybody wants GPS. I think a lot of people assumed wrongfully that in a tech age and in a tech state, that wouldn't be the case. The GPS-enabled device obviously allows for the most rigor and detail in terms of determining your miles and what's eligible to be taxed. If you do the non-GPS approach, it just gives drivers basically an electronic odometer. They don't have to do anything. It transmits your miles, and again, you were getting, in this case, they were getting invoices on a monthly basis in the pilot. So quick take on and observations on the pilot operations. So generally speaking, when we launched this system, we did multiple rounds of system testing. About 6 months out before it launched, we were in the process of doing that, identified a number of bugs and glitches. So by the time we got ready to launch and really go forward with this, we really had no system operational issues once we went live. The multi-jurisdictional interoperability hub I mentioned with Oregon State really went successfully, and I think more for the national interest really demonstrated how we can report miles and move funds between jurisdictions in a pretty seamless, effective, and efficient way. In the case of our test with Oregon, we actually built a clearinghouse, kind of a cloud-based system that we referred to as the RUC Hub. And in that, it was the first cash test done nationally. Nobody has actually moved money between states for this purpose. So we wanted to see what would happen, and how it worked was drivers from Washington State were being charged 2.4 cents a mile, and our gas tax is at 49.4 cents a gallon. In Oregon, their rec rate, I believe, is at 1.7 cents a mile, and their gas tax, I believe, is at 37 cents currently. So different gas tax rates, different rec rates, right? So we wanted to be able to identify the miles driven in-state and out-of-state and give drivers a credit for the gas tax, presumably that they paid in the state when they filled up for those miles. That's a big assumption that they filled up in Washington. We don't know where they fill up, and that ultimately will be a policy call by the legislature if they move this forward as to whether or not they do want to give a gas tax credit. We assumed it in this pilot, so drivers got a credit on both sides, and then the difference was ultimately what each state owed each other. And we both got invoiced for it. And really what it demonstrated is that if you are familiar with the IFTA model for freight truckers nationally, it's a very similar system where Congress and our federal regulators determined a system where states could manage and license trucks that do interstate travel and be able to license and tax and handle all that, even though they're in all sorts of states. This model was very similar to that, and what we're contemplating is a similar national board being created as states, if we have a situation where we have a patchwork of states doing road charging and not a national policy on this. There will have to be a system in place where there can be some consistency so we don't impact interstate travel or interstate commerce or the exchange of revenues, right? And we don't want to have a situation where we have 20 different states, so to speak, all doing it differently. So this was a big interest by USDOT and some of the congressional folks who are trying to figure this out. It worked really well, and we think we've created a model where states could literally just snap on to this structure and allow states the flexibility to have a lot of reliance on this hub clearinghouse or minimal reliance in terms of what data they turn over and what the role of that hub would be for their purposes. So that's yet to be seen how that'll play out, but it worked out really well in the pilot. In the pilot, we had 2 private firms providing the mileage collection services and the account management. That worked very well. One of the drawbacks, perhaps, for some people was that one of the firms that was the predominant provider gave us for free an app that we could let our test drivers download if they wanted to. It came from the insurance industry, which already is doing this and already doing the plug-in pay-as-you-go insurance. So they changed the branding and all that good stuff. But the app was actually measuring speed and braking and a number of other metrics that the state wouldn't necessarily want or need for road charging. But we went ahead and took the freebie and said, sure, a lot of people liked it, but some people felt it was invasive. It pinged you every time you parked your car and said, here's your driving score. And, people thought, why are they scoring me? So it could be viewed as intrusive. Other people thought it was really helpful and that they learned a lot about their driving habits. Some people gamified it. My husband and I used to compare scores every night. So that was always fun. But at the end of the day, we think that one of the lessons we learned from that free app was that the government, if they do this, needs to offer a white label option where there may be people who want that plug-in device. They're good with that. But they really don't want a private company or the things that might come with that, including an agreement, terms of agreement that would allow them to probably use your data. So those are things consumers will have to weigh as they think about private sector choices if the legislature allows for that. Lastly, the enrollment process for the pilot generated the most inquiries, but once we launched, we had very minimal issues or contacts because of operational failures, so that went quite smooth. In terms of looking at average vehicle MPG and electric vehicles in the pilot, we actually ended up with an average MPG of 23.1 miles per gallon of our participants, which is above our state average. But some interesting findings. One was that the electric vehicles drove 31% less than our gas-powered vehicles. Not a big surprise because most people are driving EVs that have a lower range and they don't typically put on the total miles that you would see on a gas-powered vehicle each year. But hybrid electric vehicles also drove 18% less than gas-powered vehicles in the pilot. So, you could take from that potentially a road charge system, while they would have to pay more in taxes than they might pay today, depending on the number of miles they drive, they may end up actually paying less than they do today under the current flat fee amounts that were just increased on October 1st. And looking at the annual cost impact of road charging on the PEV drivers, the plug-in electric vehicle drivers in Washington, and using that test rate of 2.4 cents per mile, what we learned is that 9,400 miles per year is the tipping point under that rate for EV drivers to determine whether or not they're going to pay more or less under a road charge system. And that's because today, right now in Washington State, the flat fee for electric vehicles is $225. And there's also a new $75 fee that's being assessed on hybrid electrics as well. So when you look at that trade-off of the flat fee versus paying by the mile, EV drivers would have to reach that threshold in order to see them move over into paying a little more than they would under a flat fee system. Again, based on averages driven by PEVs in the U.S., which is 7,000 miles, drivers would pay about $168 in RUC, which would still be $57 less than our current PEV fee in our state. So as you can see, we kind of break it down, but at the end of the day, it really will be driven by how many miles people put on their EVs to do that math and kind of determine if that flat fee amount is more equitable or reasonable to them than paying by the mile. But for most Washington drivers, paying by the mile is going to be a better deal for most electric vehicle drivers in the state. Mileage reporting, in terms of that, the level of mileage reporting compliance was on average higher for those that picked the automated methods, the technology methods, and that's no surprise. It had very minimal requirement for drivers to do anything. We had some drivers complain that it was really boring to be in the pilot because they really didn't have to do anything once they plugged in. They just got an invoice sent to them, and it was informational, and they took 3 surveys, but it really wasn't a lot of work for our drivers, which was kind of the whole point. We wanted to show that this could be done with minimal impact to your daily lives. Only 6% of our 2,000 participants switched reporting methods midway through the pilot. We offered drivers a chance to try a different method of reporting just to see. So perhaps if you went with that odometer read, you might want to try the plug-in or vice versa. Very few people wanted to do that. And even less than 1% decided to switch companies that they were dealing with between the 2 companies. So it indicated to us that people, once they get settled, are pretty settled, and unless there's something wrong, change is not likely. Lastly, the takeaway for us was that we were able to accommodate these 5 reporting options, which some people thought were too many. They said, you're offering too many choices. It's too complicated. It actually went off really well, and we did a staggered start with the pilot where we phased in drivers week by week by week, which would probably be very similar to what would happen in a real system, but in a longer runway in terms of starting it. And it worked quite well again. There did not have to be a flip the switch where one day something turned off and something turned on. So in terms of pilot participants, we did 3 surveys over the 12-month period, one at the beginning, one at the middle, and one at the end. There's a lot of data. I'm just going to give you just a few high-clip findings. Overall experience with the pilot, what did you think? 91% were very satisfied. Most people found it very easy to participate and not as invasive as some people thought it may be. We asked folks how they felt about implementing a RUC as a replacement to the gas tax to fund infrastructure. In survey 1, you can see about 21% strongly supported. That shifted to 37%. We also see shifts on the somewhat support. So overall, we get over 60% in terms of support from our drivers in the pilot. We also saw a small increase in the strongly opposed, which we're not sure why, which we're continuing to try to look at that data and understand why some people might have become a little more opposed to it. And of course, the need more information shrank down to 7% after a year's long of experience. Based on your experience in the pilot, we asked folks how their attitude towards the RUC system changed. As you can see, between the dark blue and light blue, they were either much more or a little more supportive. Again, 36% started out and ended up kind of where they started, basically, which means they might have started out not liking it and ended up that way, or they could have started out really supportive and not changed as well. So we have about 36% that did not change and about 48% that became more supportive through the experience. So we asked a question of the participants at the end, and we said, which do you think best represents your advice to elected officials as they consider next steps? Surprisingly, 28% said, do it as soon as you can be ready. 33% said gradually phase it in over a 5 to 10 year period. So when you combine that again, we have a very large percentage of drivers, at least in the pilot, saying that they thought that some kind of transition should start within at least the 5 to 10 year period, if not sooner. Also surprisingly, because anecdotally as we went around the state, a lot of people were pretty excited about saying, yeah, make the EV drivers pay. That's great. Just leave me alone. And what we saw in the pilot really was that only about 19% of our participants felt that was a fair policy that should go forward. 19% felt that it should only go on hybrids or higher fuel efficiency vehicles. So, not a lot of push as far as trying to segment who pays and who doesn't pay or have to go into this RUC system. And lastly, about 10% said take no further action into the foreseeable future. So knowing what you know today, we asked our participants which method to fund transportation they'd prefer, and we did see an increase from about 43 to 53%, saying they felt road charging or paying by the mile was the approach they did prefer. Not a lot of huge shifts in the other segments. So the commission took a report that came from our 28-member steering committee that's been really working on this with their sleeves rolled up for about almost 8 years now, and the results of the pilot, and took their input from a final report of findings, reviewed that, and ultimately issued 15 preliminary recommendations on the next steps for RUC in Washington. I won't go through all 15 now, but in the next couple days we're going to be going live with the website where people can go on and provide kind of open-ended comments about what they think and their thoughts. That will be included in the record and move forward to the legislature as well. But the Commission's recommendations are largely focusing on including methods for transitioning, looking at this as kind of a slow transition. They do support starting a transition to road charging, considering the long-term view of gas tax and the fact that our fleet is slowly transitioning away from fossil fuel over to more fuel-efficient vehicles and electric vehicles in the long run. So we figure that the sooner we can begin that, the better. Final recommendations will be adopted at their December 17 meeting. Some of the summaries of these, I guess the summaries I will say of these 15 recommendations is they will likely recommend that legislature take a very slow and gradual approach to introducing road usage charging in Washington, including a startup phase to inform a transition plan before any kind of fleet-wide program is contemplated. So a lot of work to still be done and a lot to learn before we contemplate going from, let's say, 1% of the fleet to 80% or 90% of the fleet statewide. In the startup phase, the Commission feels that it should include vehicles that pay little or no gas tax, so basically plug-in electrics and hybrids, which currently do pay and are subject to the flat annual fees under state law. This would allow us, again, to continue to test and develop a system with a very small pool of vehicles in a real program, and it would also make us the first state in the country to have a neighboring state, Oregon, in which we can do some real testing and it'd be a real incubation for knowledge and learning on what this could mean for the national transportation system. And lastly, the Commission would recommend that we include state-owned vehicles, a state-owned vehicle fleet in this transitionary pool. It's cars that people are driving. You aren't supposed to be going certain places in those cars, so I think there's a feeling that your privacy isn't as important if you're driving a state vehicle. So they want to test some different approaches using those vehicles and use that as an opportunity, again, to populate the data and the knowledge base around charging by the mile. They will recommend that the legislature consider implementing very strong privacy protection measures in state law specific to road usage charging. If they do enact a law, that takes the first step. And they will recommend, likely, that they restrict RUC revenues to highway-related expenditures by making road charging subject to 18th Amendment of the Washington State Constitution. Lastly, the Commission has issued a preliminary recommendation that we assess potential equity impacts of road charging. This is an area we've not spent a lot of time on. We are seeking further federal dollars to help fund this research. But again, trying to understand the impacts that going to a pay per mile might mean for communities of color, low income, underrepresented communities, people that are going to gas pumps today and have $10 in their pocket and want to buy gas. What are they going to do? How will they fit into a new system that might have more of a technology-driven base and maybe all electronic-based? So these are questions we don't totally have answers to yet that is going to require further research to understand what the implications are going to be. We also want to continue assessing road charging on a broader scale, including looking at new testing new approaches to collecting miles. I mean, we only know what we know today, and we only use what we have available today in our technology, but as you well know, that technology force is moving very quickly, and we can only imagine what we're going to have in 5 years that we don't have today or that we're even aware about. One area of promise we see emerging that will make a lot of this jockeying and process needs today go away is that we know the oil companies have deployed and will be deploying what I call smart pumps. They're pumps that have Bluetooth that can receive data feeds. And as more and more cars in the fleet transition, the old ones transition out, new ones come in that have Bluetooth capabilities, there will likely become a day where we could go back to being a transactional point of purchase assessed tax, where a driver could potentially, maybe when they pull up to the pump, be given the opportunity to perhaps pay for the miles since the last fill up, and if they choose, force a feed of data to the pump so that it can calculate. And I say this like it's so simple, but it could be done. But like I said, there's a lot of technological development that still needs to happen, including how that data would be securely transmitted between the vehicle and the pump. But we do see a day where that may come back around, but we're not there yet today. And lastly, the Commission will urge that we continue to collaborate and research with other states, namely Oregon and Utah, who's also going to be launching a road charge program in January of 2020, to understand better cross-border dynamics and travel and how we can potentially lower operational costs and costs of collection, which are a big increase over the cost to collect the gas tax. And also to look at potential enforcement measures between states. Lastly, this is the long curvy road we've been on. We're at the bottom now, approaching that 2020 dot, and we will be issuing the final report in January with all of the very large appendices and a lot of information for the legislature to contemplate as they consider starting a transition away from the gas tax. And you can go to this website if you'd like to continue to follow it or get in our newsletter list to keep posted on our progress. That's it.
Great. Any comment from Bellevue staff?
Nope.
Okay. Couple of questions for council, and we'll launch in a couple of points. It's 9:07. And we have two other items. May not take that long to go over, but so I want us to be conscious of that. I'd prefer to be done by 10. Lots of information. I think one thing would be, and Councilmember Robertson has mentioned this several times, I think we're now getting to that point where some form of a council interest statement regarding the road usage charge should begin to be worked on. Doesn't have to be immediate, but I think it should begin to be worked on. The second question would be, is there anything, and I think this would be more toward transportation and government affairs staff, anything in here that you see that we really need, that you would think we should have a comment on by the time the commission takes action on December 17th? So that we don't need to answer quite tonight, but if the answer to that is yes, we need to come back to that, right? Okay, so I'm going to jump across the table to Mr. Neuenhaus and see if he supports placing these on bicycles.
I wasn't ready for that question.
I know you weren't. That's why I asked it.
Sure. First, thank you so much for the presentation tonight. And my first question regarding the 2.4 cents per mile. So, if that were to move forward at that rate, do you see or envision a scenario where there might be rates would go up or down depending on peak travel times versus non-peak travel times? Actually, I think the PSRC may have taken a vote on this or had moved towards kind of a 5 cent or a 10 cent, depending upon when someone's in the car and when they're driving. So any thought to that at all?
Yeah, so the commission will likely have a statement in the report around this.
Okay.
They've discussed that in order to do some kind of pricing, whether it's day of week or time of day or by facility, it really in the context of could it someday replace all the tolling gantries and infrastructure that have to be invested on tolled facilities. But we realize in order to do that would require that every driver have a GPS plug-in device, because we would then have to know precisely when you're on what highway, what time of day, and what day of week, so that we could accurately assess not only your wreck charges, but your tolls. And the commission feels pretty strongly that in order to protect privacy and allow consumers to have full flexibility on how they would participate in this kind of taxation program, that would be a no-go for the foreseeable future. That's not to say the legislature will agree or want to do it that way, but we believe that tolling and road charging should remain separate. They certainly can have a coordination factor behind the scenes between, those back office connections, certainly for maybe achieving a one account system. Where you could have one account with one amount of money, one credit card, but it could pay for both of those charges. But when you think about introducing pricing as part of that, and I know the PSRC has made assumptions in their long-range plan, around it being a revenue source.
Exactly.
I would say that at least the commission is not there yet in saying that that's the way we should go anytime soon, recognizing that it could happen down the road, but they don't see that as something that's a feasible thing to do right now because of the fact that we would have to have everybody have GPS.
Gotcha. Okay. So moving to a question that I know you've received many times before about the 18th Amendment there.
Yeah.
So do you think that the legislature could vote on the 18th Amendment to make sure that includes the RUC prior to this going into effect if it does move forward?
It requires a legislative vote and a public vote to do an actual amendment to the Constitution.
Okay.
There are ways to create that type of...
Is that mandatory to go to vote to the public?
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And it's not an easy lift. There are ways to dedicate revenue sources and subject them to 18th Amendment requirements or restrictions without actually doing a constitutional amendment. That would be in statute, and obviously that means the future legislature could theoretically come in and amend it, but they have done it with some of the licensing fees and they have not been amended, and we feel that that is how they go about establishing these restrictions will be up to them, but there will be options laid out in the report on how they legally could go about doing that, from lawmaking, amendatory type laws, to all the way to a constitutional amendment, and what would be the requirements around that.
And then there was a statement there about, and naturally you would expect this, the participants don't want to have to pay for a RUC and a gas tax.
Yes.
But do you see in any possible way, after a certain period of time and RUC is getting implemented and the gas tax is supposed to go away,
Someday.
but then wait, we do have some other things to pay for. Do you see a scenario in which that could happen potentially, and what protections the public might have so they're not paying for both the gas tax and a RUC?
Well, I mean, how can anyone bind a future legislature? You can't,
well,
unfortunately,
true.
right? I mean, I think the intent, they have been clear year after year that they intend this to be a one or the other kind of thing. They stopped short of saying the gas tax will go away, largely because we have a huge bond commitment to our bondholders. And if you think about the current 2015-2016 gas tax revenue, it's going to raise, we hope, about $16 billion over 16 years with a lot of assumptions. Bond buyers in the investment market are paying attention to the fact that our fleet is getting more fuel efficient, and we have pledged our gas tax revenues in these triple-back bonds as the first pledge. What do we do when we start to see our gas tax revenues tip down? That could be potentially a catastrophe from a financial standpoint that I don't think anybody wants the state to be in. So I think right now road charging is really being looked at as a very incremental thing that could either backfill potentially those revenues and slowly start being pulled into that financing scheme that maybe someday we could use the revenues to help support. But in the meantime, every time the state treasurer's office issues a batch of bonds, a clock starts, a 25-year clock starts on that commitment. And if the state doesn't have billions of dollars to defease those bonds, we have to keep the gas tax in place. Even if it's trickling, you cannot legally unplug it unless you can write a check or you say, we've demonstrated this other source or sources that we're going to use to support that repayment to the bond
Okay.
market. So there's some financing complications. So every
Clearly.
time we issue, we've got a new 25-year clock starting. So the gas tax isn't going to disappear for a long time. At least, we're looking at least 30 years, if not more. Even if it's trickling down, the hope is revenues will be plentiful and we'll be able to maybe defease it at some point. But today, that is a really heavy, I think, consideration that legislators are aware of.
Okay.
That they're looking at it more of how do we make sure our financing is kept stable and that we can deliver the current package, and then what about the ongoing needs that are already being talked about,
Right.
you know, and that a proposal was put out this last session. So
Okay.
I think they're wrestling with all that, and I don't think there's an intent to do what you're worried about, but, you know, nobody
intent is one
can
thing.
guarantee anything. We'll have to watch carefully.
Okay. So one last question, because I remember in your previous update, you spoke about some social objectives, such things as the carbon emissions reductions,
Oh, yeah,
et cetera.
right.
So which of those are still in play? Which of those perhaps don't have as much emphasis as before? And which ones do you plan on perhaps moving forward with or making a recommendation on?
Well, I think where we've landed on those is that what we've learned is road charging helps us harmonize our policies. Right now, they're in conflict, so we have to make, we want drivers to consume fossil fuel. We want them to fill up. We need that gas tax. It's a consumption-based tax. So if you're not filling up very often, we have a problem, right?
Right.
We lose money for roads. So that's the one side. Then the other side is we have state laws on the books today that say we need to reduce VMT and we need to reduce emissions, all for the right reasons. But those are in conflict. So how do you bring those together? Road charging allows for that opportunity for policymakers to have levers they've never had before in terms of thinking about policy harmonization in the context of generating revenue. So with a road charge, we no longer care if you're consuming fossil fuel or you're plugging in or you're using corn oil. Doesn't matter. You can use whatever you want. We don't really even care what your MPG is. We just need to know how many miles you drove. So it kind of disengages and brings harmony to those policies because now we can achieve lower VMT and we can achieve lower emissions and not threaten the base funding for roads and bridges in our ferry system. So it kind of happens naturally. The door does open for legislators also to think about disincentivization type policies or incentivization policies in terms of by car type. If they wanted to do a flat 2.4 cent rate, for example, they could. And it applies to the vehicles they identify are going to go in first, for example. But in a future situation where let's say 60% of the fleet is now in a ruck, they may come a time where they're going to look at, do we want more of this or less of that? And is it a different rate for more or less? So not pricing, but maybe vehicle weight comes up sometimes. Should your vehicle weight matter on the rate you pay? Should your engine type be a factor? So there's things, it opens a door that they certainly don't have today with the gas tax.
Right.
And it'll yet to be seen how they would use that kind of new flexibility, if you will, and opportunity to either support policies or to generate revenues.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
And again, thanks for the presentation.
Shocking to believe that there are conflicting policies in how we drive.
I know, who knew?
Yeah, who knew?
We don't like to talk about it publicly, but.
Ms. Robertson, followed by Ms. Zahn.
Councilmember Newhouse covered a lot of what I had to say, but the gas tax remaining in place, that I would imagine would be even after the bonds are paid off for the out-of-state people that come from out of state. You didn't mention. I've seen this presentation several times.
Thanks.
So
You
I
just
wanted to make
reminded
sure
me,
to remind you that people that come from out of state wouldn't be on the
Exactly.
rock and therefore
They
would
could
still be
keep
using our
paying.
roads, right? So a couple of comments, and also what about liquid natural gas vehicles? Because I understand that the U.S. is number one in the world for reducing greenhouse gas emissions because of the natural gas fleet conversions. Do they pay gas? They don't pay gas tax, do they?
No.
Where do they fit in this?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't believe they're being assessed right now unless there's a, sales tax or some general tax that's being put on natural gas that we're not aware of. Nothing's coming to transportation that I'm aware of from those sources. But yeah, they would definitely be exactly the kind of situation that why you would want to apply a RUC to at least certain parts of the fleet that aren't currently paying a gas tax.
You might think about, as this moves forward, including them with the electric vehicles because
yes.
That's a different
Hydrogen fuel, yeah.
The different alternative fuels.
Exactly.
They're still using
Okay.
the roads. So I appreciate a lot of the recommendations. They recognize a lot of the concerns. I know that you've heard here as well as elsewhere about
Yeah.
privacy and about the 18th Amendment. I would point out that we have on our ballot this year a constitutional amendment from the state legislature, so it can be done.
It can be.
And I would encourage that be the way they do it, rather than just a statute. I think that would provide better protections for
Yes.
the payers. The privacy issue, of course, I like that there's multiple ways to, that you've piloted this. But if you don't want to pay miles that you drive on private roads, you have to have the GPS. And I think that that's a real concern for people, especially people that like to, that shop a lot and are driving around the malls.
There's that.
There's that. And you may not have may not have a ranch in Bellevue, but there's malls. People drive around those. That's a private street. Just saying. So the other thing that I would add, I guess, Joyce, and maybe Rima, when is the best timing for us to have a policy statement move forward? Would that be before the Washington Transportation Commission finishes their recommendation on December 17th, or would it be in time for it to go to the state legislature with that recommendation?
If there's something you see in the recommendations that the commission's contemplating, that would be good to have it, before the 17th.
Okay.
If you just want to say we support what you're recommending, that'd be great too. But if there's something, once it gets over the legislative arena, then there's our recommendations, and then there's what they're going to do. And so if if you have concerns you really want to hit home with the legislature, I would also recommend you consider sending something either to your delegation from this collective district area, or the chairs, just kind of going on the record if there's things you feel are important to you. Ultimately, the ball's in their court to decide all this. We'll do our best to inform them on the options and what the commission thinks is the most proper way to go about it. But there are a lot of different ways they could approach this, and so that's probably an important time to provide input as well. If a bill drops or you see something moving, that would be a good opportunity to chime in if you see something that concerns you.
Okay, well, I have five quick comments that are for Joyce or for you or whoever finds them useful. One is the 18th Amendment that I already made, the privacy concerns. The third is the hassle factor for the user. If people, and my dad is 93 years old, he does not use a cell phone, he does not use a fax. I mean, there are drivers like him out there who would have a real hard time with this.
Yes.
So having to try to get a credit later if they're, and take pictures, it's, for those of us who are addicted to our smartphones,
yes,
it's a snap.
Right.
But that is not 100% of the people who drive in the state of
Absolutely.
Washington. So that's the hassle factor for the user. The cost of collection, you didn't touch on this too much, but the gas tax is incredibly efficient to collect.
Yes.
This is a lot less efficient. Did we say 20%, do you think, cost?
We're estimating it could max out anywhere from 16 to 18 with a lot of variances. We think it can get down very quickly with other states starting programs and with private sector roles supporting it. But there's a lot of things that will shape what those costs will ultimately be, but they should not exceed 18. But it's more like a tolling type of
and gas
cost
tax is
overhead
what,
than it is
6%?
Less than 1%.
Less. I always
it's like you're not going to beat it.
So every dollar you pay in gas tax, less than 1 cent goes to
Yeah.
administration, and this it would be 17 to 18.
Yeah.
So that's a thing that's a
Yes.
real concern of making sure that we, if this is meant to pay for the roads, and yet so much is being siphoned off for administration, are we really netting more to pay for the roads? And then the fifth is, of course, the equity among the types of users, whether it's an LNG vehicles or the plug-in electric vehicles. If the real issue in the gas tax not covering it is that certain vehicles don't pay their share, do we really need to solve that by overhauling the entire system?
Correct.
And that's a policy question that is not mine to struggle with, but it's one that Joyce, hopefully you can lead us in creating a policy statement about it, because it's pretty hard especially when the administrative collection costs are so high. And the privacy implications are so much. So thank you.
Keep moving.
I'm done.
And I would imagine that protection of gas tax revenue, the amount of gas tax revenue that comes to municipal and local government, would be something that might just be in our interest statement. Ms. Zahn.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is important for us to have an interest statement so that we set our intention about what we're trying to do. I also agree that we should be willing to go first, that our own vehicles should be part of that original start, because now we have more skin in the game, right, in terms of how do we look at reducing our administrative costs? How do we make sure that we really understand how all of the things work? And if we're asking other people to do it, we need to be willing to go first. And I also believe that we absolutely need to have a sustainable revenue source for transportation. I think that our infrastructure is only becoming more aging and not less. And as we look at our region actually growing, we're actually having more transportation and infrastructure needs and not less.
Right.
So how we actually go about doing that, I guess the part I'm wondering about, though, is when we talk about the 2.4 cents, is that number, is it going to be tied to some formula where it might change over time, or how does that really work?
So the commission did talk through this some, and the legislature will presumably set a rate if they go forward for the vehicles that would be subject to this. The notion was, what if they raise the gas tax in 2 years or 3 years? You know, then the differentiation keeps changing if you adjust one and not the other. So there'll be their recommendation will state or talk about the notion of them staying in sync. So does that mean if you raise the gas tax or they were to raise the rec rate in the future, does that necessitate an automatic, lift of both? So that type of coordination is going to be critical because of the fact that we are talking about it being a revenue neutral, if you will, trade between whether I pay the gas tax or I pay the road charge. Regardless of how many miles I drive, that base calculation should be as fairly set as possible. And Oregon does contemplate this in the way they operate their system. So we've got a lot of input on a real experience around how you keep those in sync so they don't get out of whack if the legislature goes crazy and raises one and not the other.
Because it seems like there are nuances, like
Absolutely.
I think Councilmember Newman-House was talking about. And then I was actually thinking, if you think about our ferry system, there's a
Yes.
different fee depending on how many axles you have and how big you are.
Exactly.
So, if we really think about it as a revenue for transportation infrastructure, do the larger vehicles that have more of an impact on our roads, are they actually paying more per mile than those that are actually much more of a soft touch? So
Right.
I think there's a lot of pieces and parts to this. So really important then for us to say, well, what's our interest statement from the city standpoint, and do we sign on to all of this? I do think it makes sense because that we're actually trying to promote folks moving more into electric vehicles, which then drives into reducing the actual gas tax that's being collected.
Correct.
Right, so I'm excited about that. I agree with the other comments about privacy and just making sure that we have the interoperability. So thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any data on public response or opinion on this new discussion, conversation? What kind of information do we have?
Well, there was some of the stats I shared with you in the presentation that were from participants in the pilot. We did do a statewide survey just before the pilot started. So you kind of got a benchmark of a statewide viewpoint of what people thought of the gas tax and road charging. Of course, a lot of people did not like the idea of paying per mile before the pilot started. And I think that was one of the points of the pilot, was to show that a lot of times when you talk about change, it's difficult to do and to contemplate, but when you experience the change, you're able to better determine whether or not you think it's a good idea or not. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to gather that data before. But we have gotten a ton of public input as well from our call center. Over 2,000 calls came in over that 12-month period. 38% were non-participants. People just heard about it in the media and wanted to know more. Our website continues to get pretty active hits. There's a lot of people looking at the information, which is great. I mean, that's what we're striving to do, is really generate a public dialogue, not just about this, but about the problem we're facing, because it's going to become everybody's problem at some point, and we don't want it to be a panic, and we don't want people to feel like they had no idea, and that this big change was coming potentially. So I think we've gotten a lot of input from a variety of ways.
Can you share, if it's available, can you share with us this public feedback?
Absolutely.
Because I think at least I do, council does, we value public engagement a lot, public participation. So I think this, I would like to see what are the public reaction, response, and especially if they have your information about the pilot.
Yes.
That would give us even better
Absolutely.
indication of where the public is.
I'd be happy to send that to you.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So the gas tax that we charge now, the cities get a certain percentage
Yes.
of that. And I think that in our packet, it showed that we'd be losing $3 million.
Potentially.
Yeah. So I would just like
Yeah.
a little more of an explanation about how
Yeah.
this change in the fee is going to maintain that funding for transportation for us.
Well, the commission will, in its report, outline, so you think about this as a transition, and the notion isn't taking the entire state fleet and moving it over. So when we're talking about 1% of the fleet, honestly, in this first step that could go on for 10 years, there's not a lot of money on the table to be had, and so it won't change anything for anybody, frankly, because the gas tax is going to continue to be collected and be the 99.9% source of revenue for transportation. When they get to that point down the road in the future where they want to take, if they want to take that next step and let's say jump to 30 or 40% of the fleet or more, that's when these tougher policy discussions will have to happen around, does anything change with the paradigm of the way in which the gas tax is structured today and how it's distributed? Does it have to change? No. And we don't, there's some people that will say, in 30 years, if we have a RUC system and it's, everybody's on it, there's gonna be a lot of data on where people drive potentially, like what county? Does that data work for or against the county or the city or the state? Does it matter, or do they continue with this direct formula distribution? These are questions that policymakers will have to wrestle with. That we certainly aren't there today. This is something, if they want to advance it, will be put on their radar in this report. As far as you look ahead to the out years, there's going to be many things you're going to have to wrestle with if you want to advance it fleet-wide, and that will be one of the significant ones. There's also people that get direct cuts of the gas tax, like off-road vehicles and recreational folks, that get it in lieu of using that gas for off-road purposes. And it goes into a recreational account that funds a lot of off-road parks and recreationalists. They want to know what's going to happen. Tribes want to know what's going to happen with the compacts. If the gas tax someday goes away or is no longer viable, what happens to the compacts and those expectations? So there's a variety of these kinds of potentially impactful policies that the decision makers will have to wrestle with on how much or how little will they want to change it under a new paradigm. But I will try to assure you that that paradigm, we don't arrive at it for likely at least a couple of decades, because we're really contemplating a very slow and small step to continue the learning process. Because I think there's a lot to be learned before the state says, this is our golden ticket and this is what we're going to do now, and we're on a path and in 5 years it's going to be done. I think we're quite a ways from those kind of assertions. It's more, we're ready to take the next small step to really get a much better, richer set of data and understanding as we actually do it and see how it works.
Well, I just want that to be part of the
I think that'd be
discussion
good.
before
Yeah.
we make a council and trust
Yes.
statement. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. The 18th Amendment, has there been an Attorney General's opinion as to whether or not a road usage charge is constrained by the 18th Amendment?
No, we've not asked for an opinion. It's non-existent right now. They've not created any laws that would establish it. So the way in which the legislature will choose to craft it and define it and categorize it, is it a tax, is it a fee? There's a number of legal nuances that will have to be ironed out when they set it up. And I'm sure at that time there will be consultation on all the inputs and implications of going one route versus the other.
So I think that's I think that's a very important question to ask, and I'm going to presume this is a 3 or 4 session process before
Probably,
something gets adopted. I
Yes.
mean, so it's not like you're going to make your report in January and it's going to be adopted in April.
Probably not.
Probably not. So I think we definitely have some time to wade into this. I think another question is, So we have a gas tax, and it has been staying steady as there's growth, even though there's more, as I understand it. There's a time when that's going to be actually beginning to drop down, which is going to be a bond question. How, if the legislature wants to do a package for transportation improvements, let's assume all under the auspices of the restraints of the 18th Amendment, whether it's actually restrained by it or not, but they want to do it that way. How are they going to be able to do it once it's implemented? Okay, so I think that is a really smart thing to figure out in advance, because we're not done investing in roads, and we're going to need more investment in roads. And I am certain that a few of you next year will be down asking for part of a road package. Okay, so that is something that I think we need in our policy statement and not. The other is this issue of gas and transportation have lots of, as we said, competing policies and sometimes policies. The concept of, and there was some discussion about this, cleaner fuels for vehicles. Okay, and the public is transitioning to that with hybrids and electrics. And those are getting better. But I can tell you from having purchased a car recently and really wanting to get the hybrid version, I think the manufacturers are holding back a little bit as they see that, because they can charge a premium. I don't like that concept. I probably can't do anything about that at the state legislature. But the other side of that are fleet vehicles. And that's where, maybe not necessarily under electric, but under clean fuels, there's going to be an advantage. And so there's an incentive to go to those. And I don't think we should get in the way of that, given the, climate change.
Sure.
And what we need to do. And there's policy related to climate change in the legislature. And finally, I do want to talk about public safety fleet vehicles. And I will say this again in terms of my daytime job. I work in the solid waste industry. We do not have an option, okay? We drive our trucks well over 1 million miles a year at the company I work for. We don't have an option to not drive to someone's house and pick up the trash. So there's no way that some of these fleets and public safety, Bellevue Fire Department has got to respond if there's a fire call, right? So I'm wondering about whether or not, as this goes forward, there's some way at looking at vehicle fleets that provide public safety, in particular those who have switched to clean fuels, to continue to receive benefits of that, because the public is receiving a large benefit. Frankly, if a company like Amazon, I'm not sure that's a public safety exemption, but if a company like Amazon wants to switch over to a clean fuel, we're doing much better on another really important thing, which is climate change. So I just see that policy battle as being really significant moving forward. So those are just a couple of ideas of throwing some wrenches in the mix.
On the fleet vehicles, real quick, if you're paying the diesel tax or the gas tax today for those fleets, typically they're very fuel inefficient type vehicles that in most cases are probably only getting 10 to 12 miles per gallon maybe on a given day. So you're paying today a lot. Those fleets are paying a lot of taxes today for using the roads essentially. Under a road charge system, those people that get below that state average of 20 miles per gallon will actually see a reduction in the amount of taxes they pay. Because what happens with the RUC is it equalizes the playing field where everybody pays that same, let's just say 2.4 cents per mile. So if I'm driving a car that today I could be paying 5, 6 cents, 6, 7 cents a mile, right? And meanwhile, your neighbor who's got the Prius might be paying a penny a mile. So what happens with the RUC is some people are going to end up paying more because they're not paying very much today, and those that are paying a lot actually reduce their taxes paid because they're going to only be on the hook for that same flat rate amount that everybody else is. So you actually will see benefits come to less fuel-efficient vehicle owners and fleets who are currently paying a lot because typically those delivery trucks are not getting the greatest gas mileage today.
They don't.
Yeah.
But those that are there, I know that there is a difference for those that run and have already converted to CNG or RNG.
Yes, if you're on alternative fuel, that's
Yeah,
a different,
yeah, exactly.
different
And-
calculation.
And that, again, this is this battle between,
Yeah.
because in all candor, I did get an email on Friday and Houston had a problem, which is where headquarters is.
Oh.
So you may get a call from me with my day job hat on, or someone on your staff.
That's interesting, and in those cases, sometimes weight is more of a better proxy sometimes.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with something very heavy on the pavement, and that's where these little levers come in that lawmakers don't have today that may help contemplate almost a three-dimensional world as opposed to a one-dimensional world we're into today with the gas tax. So really no flexibility with the gas tax. Everybody pays it and the diesel tax. It doesn't matter what kind of vehicle you drive or what fuel you use. If you're filling up, you're paying.
Yeah.
Ability to pay doesn't matter. So it's kind of like we shift into a new paradigm really completely as we think about this.
Yeah, it's just one area of where I see this
Yeah.
policy,
Yeah.
these policy issues.
Yes.
And it'll be with equity and a number of other issues
Absolutely.
that I say it's, several sessions away from
Yes.
something moving forward would be my
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Mr. Stokes, I'll let you have one last crack, but we have
Fascinating, but
okay, so we've already done the policy use charge has already been used up. Thank you, and thank you for that. Okay, yes, Joyce.
Going forward with council direction that we've received tonight and your feedback, I would recommend this as the mayor said, this is a multi-session conversation. And it seems like we want to put a little box around what we do right now and respond to the recommendations and to consider the other interest statements that council has adopted, like the smart mobility and some of the other things that relate to these technological recommendations. And put in less is more, but get to the nitty-gritty for this session. Watch what happens and where the conversations are going, especially in light of the, there's quite an appetite to float another transportation package, a statewide transportation package in 2020 that may not be acted on in 2020 session, but you're going to have competing things out there, competing issues, and we have needs to get some of these big road projects finished, like the 124th interchange, and I think we're going to have to shuffle a little bit to make sure that we're not out there with contradictory messages. So we'll come back to you with something in an interest statement that should at least get us through this session, and then modify it every time.
Yeah, I think something that's fairly short that would respond to kind of the recommendations going forward. Take your time, go slow, consider. I mean, I think something. I think it would make sense for us to get an oar in the water, even if it's at a 30,000 foot level, and we may not have much more time to do much more than a 30,000 foot level, and we've got to have it done by December 10th.
And maybe include in that the mayor's interest in the bike road usage charge as well.
I'm sorry, bicycle use charge?
Yes.
Yeah, no, he's the bicycle rider. Okay, thank you very much. We have got two other items to go here. I think up next is the Human Services Commission up. So we could make that change and have our staff and Chair of the Human Services Commission join us.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Tonight, you're going to hear the Human Services Commission's recommendation on the 2020 CDBG funding. Both the staff and the Chair of the Human Services Commission are here this evening. Jude Mercer, thank you, Jude, for being here to present the Human Service Commission recommendation. And joining us from the staff side is Tony Esparza, our Assistant Director in our Parks Department, and Dee Kaline, our Grant Coordinator. So with that, I will go over and turn it over to you, Tony.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council members. The city receives its CDBG funding directly from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The amount varies each year depending on the federal CDBG budget and HUD's funding formula. This process that we will be speaking of this evening is not to be confused with our Human Services funding process, which occurs every 2 years. Tonight, we are asking the council for direction to return with an ordinance approving the Human Services Commission's 2020 CDBG funding recommendations. And I've asked Dee Dee to provide some more details on Bellevue's CDBG program, the funding process, and our Human Services Commission's funding recommendations.
Thank you, Tony. Good evening. Bellevue's federal CDBG funding has increased steadily over the past few years, largely due to increases in the federal CDBG budget. We expect our 2020 funding to be similar to this year's amount, but we won't know that for sure until Congress approves the 2020 federal budget. Loan repayments from the Major Home Repair Program are considered program income by HUD and are also part of the city's CDBG budget. As you can see from this slide, program income varies from year to year depending on how many loans are repaid. We expect to receive roughly $200,000 in program income this year, 2019. Estimated program income for 2020 is approximately $150,000. We are conservative in our estimate because we can always add more funding to projects if we receive more program income than we projected. Projects funded with CDBG dollars must be located in the city of Bellevue or serve mostly low and moderate income Bellevue residents. This prevents Bellevue from contributing CDBG funds to projects located in other cities, such as many ARCH projects. In addition, CDBG funds must be spent in a timely manner, preferably during the program year. This makes it difficult to fund projects that may take several years to complete. The Commission's funding recommendations are found in Attachment B in your packet. They're divided into 3 parts: public services, planning activities and grant administration, and capital projects and programs. Attachment C is the contingency plan, which dictates how funds will be allocated if the city's actual entitlement amount and program income is more or less than projected. I'll now turn the presentation over to Jude Mercer, the chair of the Human Services Commission, to review the Commission's process and their funding recommendations.
Hello, good evening, Mayor Chelmanek, Deputy Mayor Robinson, and council members. The Deputy Mayor is also the Commission's council liaison, and we thank her for her time and attention this year. The Human Services Commission carefully reviewed the 6 applications submitted for 2020 CDBG funding over 2 meetings. A public hearing to receive comments on the Commission's preliminary recommendations was held on July 16th. In addition to the planning and administration costs needed to run the CDBG program, we are recommending funding the Major Home Repair Program and the Minor Home Repair Program at their full requests. Both of these programs preserve and maintain affordable housing in Bellevue, particularly for older adults, and meet a growing need in the community. We are also recommending funding a program that Bellevue has not funded before. This is Ventures Micro Enterprise Assistance. Ventures is a nonprofit that provides technical assistance and training to low-income residents interested in developing a business via their Business Basics course. Ventures will provide 2 8-week Business Basics courses, one in English and one in Spanish. That will be held weeknight evenings at HopeLink's Bellevue location. Students then also receive 24 hours of training in topics such as marketing, finance, business plans, and taxes, and graduates have access to advanced classes and coaching. Ventures estimates they will serve 25 low-income Bellevue residents, the majority of whom will be women, people of color, and immigrants and refugees. The Commission believes this program will help participants become more self-sufficient and enable them to reach their full potential. Thank you for considering our recommendations for 2020 CDBG funding. And on behalf of the entire Human Services Commission, I thank you for your continued strong support for human services in Bellevue.
Okay. I know I would normally go to you. You said you don't need to make any comments. Mr. Stokes. Oh, you did?
I said I didn't need to make an introductory comment, but
Well,
go ahead and
you
start.
confused me.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is, and I'll defer to Deputy Mayor to ask some more general questions on this. One thing I was looking at that I wanted to ask about was the Ventures program, and having worked with planning and the particularly economic development department, and this seems to be kind of overlapping things that economic development is doing. Was there any effort to coordinate with them on this, and how does it fit into the programs that department's doing in economic development and coordinating with the 425 funding program?
Yes.
And yeah, is there any difference, or are there some synergies we could get working together? How does just kind of curious about it.
There are some differences. The Economic Development team came and spoke to the Commission in April about their programs, including the Startup 425 Foundations program. And some of the differences are Ventures focuses specifically on low-income populations, especially below 80% of the area median income. Their typical client supports a family of 2 at $24,000 a year. The Startup 425 Foundations classes also provide information about starting a business, but they don't collect data on participants' income, so it's not limited to low-income residents. In 2018, they did a survey of their participants in the Foundations workshop and found that 75% of the workshop attendees had at least a bachelor's degree, with the largest share of attendees coming from the technology industry. And 25% were in their early career, 50% in mid-career, and 25% were late career. So it kind of skews a little more toward more educated people looking to start a side business or a new business, not so much low-income people who are wanting to learn about a small business, is it even feasible, helping them to work their way out of the low-income bracket to become more self-sufficient. So those are some differences between the two programs.
So this could be a kind of an adjunct to Startup 425, and I would think there'd be a lot of synergy in working together with them, and they could help this program, and you're already talking with them, so that's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, in April, they mentioned they could refer some clients who approach them who aren't quite right for their program to this program.
Okay, very good, thank you.
And I'm sorry for skipping the liaison to the Human Services Commission and misunderstanding her scribbled hastily note.
I just want to thank you for your thoughtful conversations that you have at the meetings and all the things that you consider for the residents of Bellevue. You do an excellent job, and I don't think people realize how much the Human Services funding really supports our city in every aspect. And I just want to really thank you for that.
Thank you.
That was it.
Okay, we are getting late, but Councilmember Zahn.
I wanted to understand your comment about how this can be challenging because there's limited funds to support multi-year projects. Can you give me an example of what one of those are?
Well, several years ago, Bellevue used to contribute money to ARCH for a low-income housing project to be determined later. So as you probably are aware, these projects take a long time to get enough funding and come to fruition. And so we might give some CDBG money 3 years in a row to this project to be named later. And the trouble with that is HUD requires us to spend at a certain rate. So we can't have more than 1.5 times our annual entitlement amount in our HUD bank, so to speak. So if we don't spend quickly enough, if we have something kind of waiting for our project to happen, we can run into trouble with that timeliness spending.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I really like the micro enterprise and what you said, which is what I hear you saying is that maybe the Startup 425 can feel a little intimidating for those that are low income trying to get started. So this may be a slightly safer space for them to learn. And so as we look at this, maybe ultimately it can move into Startup 425. But for now, the ability to have a small organization be able to help and see if we actually are getting an increase in the number of folks that are being served, because that gives us an idea that perhaps this is an underrepresented community and we need to do something slightly differently than the big startup 425 that we have. So I'm really excited for this. Thank you.
Yeah, we were excited by their presentation. It was very well done.
Okay, Commissioner Mercer, thank you, or Chair Mercer, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying late into the evening, and please pass along our thanks to the Human Services Commission for the great work. Is there consensus to bring this back on the November 18th meeting on consent?
Yes. Yep.
All right. There appears to be consent, so we will do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. How much time do we need? Do we need extension for 10 minutes?
I can only say no. This will be very, very.
Okay, and this is the, okay.
We really are interested.
I'm going to be.
We're coming back.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
It's more to let you know when.
This is just a kickoff.
Okay. 5 minutes for the mid-by schedule.
All right, so tonight, Council, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council members, tonight here, we're just to get started on the mid-biennium. It's a pleasure to be back here this evening. It's direction only, and our purpose tonight is really to outline the next 6 meetings and what we'll be doing in each of those 6 meetings for the mid-biennium. As you might remember, the mid-by is a time for us to take a step back, take a peek at what our budget's doing, make adjustments for known events, and make adjustments for known conditions in the marketplace, and then also any other adjustments that need to be done. And this is the outline of what we anticipate bringing back to you for the next 6 meetings. So on November 4th, Director Brennan will be here to talk about a development services fee update. That is his annual update that he does. On November 12th, we have quite a meeting for you this year. So we'll do an overview of the mid-by adjustments. We'll hit the general fund forecast. And then last year, when you adopted the budget, you asked staff to come back at the mid-biennium to talk about fire inspection fees and the nexus between the time spent and the fee. So the fire department has done that work, and they'll be back on the 12th. And then we'll also talk about House Bill 1406, which is the Affordable Housing Sales Tax Credit, and the actions that this body needs to take in order to secure that funding effective January 1. November 18th, you can see we'll be back with some details for you. And then on the 25th, we have open placeholder for council follow-up if you have anything. We'll do a mid-by public hearing that evening. And if you direct us, we'll come back with a tentative adoption on December 2. And as expected, there is quite a laundry list of things that we need to adopt when you adopt the mid-biennium, right? So you've got a development services fee ordinance you'll need to update. You'll need to update for 2020 fire inspection fees. You'll have to set the property tax levy for 2020. They do that annually. You'll also have to set our banked capacity, which is the amount of money we keep at the county for future use when you so choose that use, right? And then, of course, you'll have to do what we consider, in lay terms, the umbrella ordinance, or the big, long list of every fund in the appropriation that you'll need to do. And then, of course, as we proceed, there may be other actions that you direct staff to bring back as well. So at this point, we're just here to say, welcome to the mid-biennium. We're coming, and we'll see you for the next 6 meetings in a row. And with that, Mayor, I will turn it back to you.
Any quick questions? Okay. I think we are, we're very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Call. Okay, any other business before the City Council tonight? A lot of very good work tonight. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the comments, keeping them tight. And we're going to adjourn 2 minutes early.